Many children across the English-speaking world grew up hearing Mother Goose nursery rhymes about mice running up clocks, old women living in shoes, and one unfortunate egg by the name of Humpty Dumpty. But have you ever heard the rhyme about the Crooked Man? Most of us who heard that particular poem remember it like this. There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. A little bit odd, but hey, most nursery rhymes are. When have you ever seen a little girl sitting on a tuffet eating some curds and whey? What even is a tuffet? Honestly, what are curds and whey? Let's just move on. Residents of the sleepy English hamlet of Tenby in Oxfordshire hear a more menacing version of the rhyme about the Crooked Man, sung as a song on playgrounds, shared in hushed tones when the grown-ups aren't listening. It goes like this. There lived a crooked man who made a crooked deal. He kept a crooked cane and his catch in crooked creel. He stole a crooked child who cried a crooked squeal, and that crooked little man was broken on the wheel. It sounds just as inscrutable as any other nursery rhyme, but there is a dark tone to it that seems a bit out of place, especially when you compare it to the other somewhat cheery version. This creepy alternative to the Crooked Man nursery rhyme seems to only be found in the town of Tenby, and unfortunately for the residents of that town, there is a deadly truth behind its words. Many years ago, the SCP Foundation became aware of a mysterious pattern in this unassuming town. Every 12 years, over a period of roughly 70 days, something horrible would happen to townspeople who happened to be alone and indoors after dark. When they were discovered by a neighbor, a family member, a friend, or even the police, they would be unresponsive, suffering from full-body paralysis, or appearing to be effectively brain-dead. This was not the most unusual aspect of the phenomenon, though. The victims were all grotesquely transformed, their long bones covered in dozens of compound fractures, combined with excess cartilage and osseous tissue. Their limbs would become distended, stretched, and deformed into long, gnarled appendages like the limbs of an ancient tree. One of the recovered victims had a forearm measured at over 2.4 meters long. Another had to be placed in a specially outfitted hospital bed, as his spine and legs had stretched to the point where he was 12.5 meters tall. Local police and doctors alike were left scratching their heads. What had happened to these people? Clearly something horrible had been done to them, but there was no actual evidence of a crime. No one had been murdered, and there was no evidence of forced entry at any of the victims' homes. There was, however, one other piece to the crooked puzzle. Just before a victim was found, their place of residence would visibly degrade and warp, the structure itself breaking in places until portions collapsed in or became slanted. Roofs would tilt at an unsafe angle, chimneys would fold over, and door frames would twist until no ordinary person could pass through them safely. This happened every 12 years for decades, and none of the people of Tenby could do anything about it. In fact, they rarely ever so much as spoke of it, terrified of admitting the truth of their town's curse in so many words. Instead, they spoke about the phenomenon in innuendo, meaningful glances and pleas to keep loved ones company at night, and through a simple children's rhyme. One doctor tasked with treating survivors of the horror decided to do something as the 12-year mark began to approach once more. He reached out to a researcher he had known years ago, a man who specialized in the unexplained, things that modern medicine had no answer for. This man had left medicine behind and was now working for the SCP Foundation. At the time of contact, there were approximately 6 months to go until the phenomenon would begin to strike once more. The Foundation needed to act quickly in order to collect more information and hopefully find a way to stop the terror of Tenby once and for all. With about a month to go until the danger would reappear, a member of D-Class personnel referred to as D-209 was placed in a Foundation-owned house in town. Audio and visual equipment were installed throughout the house in order to monitor it for any anomalous activity and to make sure D-209 remained at his post. For the first month of his stay, D-209 did not experience anything unusual. He spent his time drinking tea, baking pies, and catching up on his reading. He even thanked the Foundation for the unexpected staycation. Unfortunately, on his 43rd day in Tenby, things changed. As D209 sat in bed reading a novel by the lamplight, the camera feed in the living room began to glitch. A vertical distortion appeared with a jagged pattern that began to make its way across the room from the front door. It was as if something was coming inside, but the camera could not pick up its image. The distortion continued through the hallway until the camera placed there cut out entirely. D209 suddenly closed his book as the sound of scratching came from the floor below. He began to slowly climb out of bed, listening for further sounds as the entity continued to make its way through the house toward him. Movement was apparent on the video feed, but there was too much interference for any image of the creature to be made out. D209 froze in his tracks as he heard footsteps, slow and certain, coming up the stairs toward him. He ran to the window, attempting to pry it open and make an escape, but it would not budge. With increasing desperation, he grabbed his bedside lamp and threw it at the window, attempting to shatter the glass. The lamp broke apart, but the window remained stubbornly intact. As he scrambled for an escape route, something knocked at his bedroom door. D209 called out toward the door. "Who is it? Who's there?" But there was no response. "Identify yourself!" Still, whatever stood on the other side said nothing. Holding the remains of the lamp in one hand as a makeshift weapon, D209 slowly reached for the doorknob and opened the door. With a sudden pop, every light bulb in the vicinity burst, including Foundation-provided floodlights positioned outside of the house. There was the sound of snapping and then an agonized scream. The camera adjusted to the lack of light in the room, allowing for a clear image of D209. He was wailing and holding his right arm, which appeared to be broken just above the elbow. The arm began to stiffen and elongate, indicating impossibly fast bone growth. "Screw this! You're not taking me! I'm getting out of here alive!" he yelled, running down the hallway. He collapsed as another snapping sound echoed throughout the hall. "My leg's broken! Send help, please!" He called to someone, anyone who might be watching the feed. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself to his feet. He lifted his right arm to the camera, showing that it had been broken again below the elbow, pointing in the opposite direction of the first break. "What are you doing? Help me!" he screamed. It doesn't even hurt anymore! That can't be right! I don't know what's happening to me!" As he continued to yell at the cameras, he limped towards the stairs, attempting to make his way down to the first floor. He missed a step, lost his balance, and fell all the way down. 12 loud snaps were heard as he went. When he landed on the ground, his bones were broken in several other places, only to be immediately set where they had broken as he screamed. He dragged himself into the living room, battling against his own body, which had become something foreign to him. His arms were growing longer, now around 2 meters long, and his legs stretched out of the camera's view, presumably into the hallway. Suddenly, he stopped crawling, his eyes widening. "No, no, no, no," he whimpered before suddenly being dragged backwards out of the camera's view. Due to the presence of the entity interfering with the cameras, all visibility was lost at this point. There was, however, still a live audio feed. The microphones picked up an hour of snapping and screaming until D209 eventually went quiet. Then, all that could be heard was a wet, sucking sound, followed by a thumping. Meanwhile, at the hospital, 27 other victims of the entity were lying in hospital beds. As D209 met his unfortunate fate, all of the hospitalized victims began to experience seizures at the same time and seized for several minutes. 5 patients were killed and 2 researchers were injured in the chaos. After the incident at the hospital, reports of a seismic event at the edge of town began to circulate. Because there had been no actual earthquake in the area, the research team realized that this disturbance had to be somehow related to the phenomenon. They planned to investigate in order to learn more about the entity behind it all, which they had now officially designated SCP-783, the Crooked Man. A team of personnel were sent to investigate the site of the seismic event, only to find a group of Tembe townsfolk clustered around the area in a field at the south of town. The crowd refused to let the researchers through and would not budge until one researcher, Agent Collins, pulled out her firearm and fired a shot into the air. The sound frightened the crowd, and they realized this mysterious foundation really meant business. Where the crowd had been, Agent Collins could see toes, unnaturally long, crooked toes, poking up out of the ground. They were going to need some help, and a lot more shovels to uncover this mystery. By the next day, a dig team had uncovered a mass grave filled with victims of SCP-783. There were dozens of elongated bodies spread throughout the 5-meter-wide hole, stacked on top of each other with their heads facing down and their arms outstretched towards the bottom of the pit. Their limbs had grown around each other, twisting together to the point where they could not be removed one at a time. While trying to collect a tissue sample from one of the bodies, researcher Singer lost his balance as the ground beneath him gave way and he fell. He attempted to find a foothold and climb back up, but fell through the gnarled arms and down into the pit. Thinking quickly, Agent Collins grabbed a rope and tied it around her waist. She would lower herself down into the grave and would signal when she was ready for them to pull her out. Agent Collins descended into the pit, over 20 meters down, before she signaled for the team to pull her back out. Then she told them what she had seen. There was something down there, the entrance to another location beneath all of the bodies. Someone asked if there was any sign of researcher Singer. Collins shook her head, face growing pale. She hadn't seen him down there. He was gone. Agent Collins was granted a temporary leave of absence, and a D-Class, D-2172, was selected for further exploration of the anomalous mass grave. He was outfitted with a retractable harness, communication and video equipment, as well as a photoionization detector, a Geiger counter, a basic survival kit, a firearm, and ammunition. D-2172 was then lowered into the pit via a crane. After 12 meters of descent, there was no longer any visible light inside the pit, and D-2172 switched on his headlamp. A few moments later, D-2172 began tugging on the tether, demanding to be lowered more quickly. When asked why, he insisted, "Someone just touched my back." At 18 meters down, D-2172 began to feel a sense of confusion and dizziness, unable to tell which direction he was going. At this point in the pit, gravity had inverted, forcing D-2172 to climb upward in order to continue moving down as he crossed into another world. There was daylight visible here again, as D-2172 climbed out from within the mass of bodies. There he found a seemingly identical version of the town of Tembe. He was instructed to take soil samples, and the monitoring researcher noticed something odd on the video feed. There were marks in the dirt around the grave that appeared to have been made by fingers pulling across the ground. They decided not to relay this to D-2172. After the soil samples came up normal, D-2172 was instructed to walk to a nearby cottage and look for any sign of the missing researcher Singer. He knocked on the door, and with no answer let himself in. He saw no one inside, and began to walk through. In the bedroom on the wall, there was a charcoal sketch of a humanoid figure holding a staff of some kind. Command ordered him to approach the drawing, but he protested, saying he felt incredibly uncomfortable looking at it. He relented and began to approach, but as he did, the quality of the video feed began to degrade until it was filled with static. D-2172 was then permitted to leave the cottage and further explore this copycat village. While walking further into the village, D-2172 spotted a work boot on the ground. He picked it up and found it was a match for the one researcher Singer had been wearing. He followed the path to another house, the door of which was wide open. He walked inside to find signs of a struggle, an overturned couch and table, a hole in the wall, the broken pieces of a lamp scattered on the floor. The kitchen was just as much of a mess, and as he investigated it further, he found a pool of blood on the floor, with significant blood splatter on the walls and counter. It looked like someone had been attacked with a weapon, likely a knife. Indeed, as he looked, D-2172 spotted a butcher's block with only one empty slot, the one that should have held a meat cleaver. The investigation led him to a locked door, covered in scratches. He broke it down and nearly fell down the stairs into the darkened basement. Instructed to head down into the basement, D-2172 switched on his headlamp, drew his weapon, and descended into the darkness. The basement was empty except for a bloody meat cleaver and a piece of pant leg caught inside an exhaust vent leading out of the house. The pants resembled those worn by Singer before his fall. D-2172 peered into the vent for a closer look, but was startled by the sight of something scuttling out of sight. Whatever it was fleshy, and it was not something he cared to see more of. D-2172 continued on his expedition, walking north and away from the town limits of Tembe. Somehow, in spite of this, he wound back up at the south side, where he had emerged from the pit. But something was different. There were no bodies, no open grave, and no tethered harness that he had taken off when he climbed out. He was trapped. The harness had not been retracted, so where had it gone? Command could not determine its exact location, but proposed that D-2172 had entered another anomalous area and was not, in fact, back where he started. He was instructed to follow the road back, retracing his steps until he wound up at the pit again. As he walked, he commented that he had not yet seen a single living thing in this place. Then, as he heard the sound of rustling leaves, he turned toward it to find the corpse of an SCP-783 victim. He turned back to continue on his way, only to see another victim sprawled across the road. He drew his weapon then, listening as the rustling began again. He spun around to look at the body behind him and found that it had stretched longer, growing closer to him. Behind him, the other body began to snap as well. He turned to fire his weapon and saw that this other body had stretched its neck, its head at eye level, only a meter away from his own face. He fired several rounds, but the corpse did not respond. Ignoring orders, D-2172 took off running into the woods, leaving the road behind. He stopped to catch his breath, sat down, and reloaded his firearm. After eating a quick MRE and informing command of his whereabouts, he set back off on his journey through the forest. After 14 minutes of walking, he began to feel movement under the ground. Short, sharp bursts of motion reverberating through the earth. He could also hear a thumping sound coming from beneath him. On the video feed, Command saw what appeared to be a silver birch tree lifting out of sight, then dropping down back into the forest, shaking the ground on impact. D-2172 was instructed to approach the object, as Command quickly realized that this was no tree. As he approached, another similar object landed near him. He fired his weapon at it, and blood began to dribble from the wound, a scream ringing out high above him. Not knowing what else to do, he ran as fast as he could, begging for help from Command, for someone to do something to get him out of there. As D-2172 ran out of the forest, making his way back to town, another one of the long, pale objects knocked him onto his back. He looked up, now able to see what it was without the trees in his way. When he saw it, he couldn't help but scream. It was Researcher Singer, or at least it had once been Researcher Singer. He had become something else, something unthinkable. His body was up in the sky, balancing on enormous, impossibly long fingers. The creature that had once been Singer shrieked, lifting a finger and preparing to bring it down on D-2172. He fired several shots, but none hit, so again he turned and ran. He reached the main road and kept running, tasting bile in the back of his throat and feeling his lungs begin to burn. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, the creature would grab him in those awful fingers, and he didn't want to think about what would happen next. Then he saw it, the pit, the bodies, his way out. He sprinted toward the pit, almost there, when a screech rang out and a massive finger knocked him aside. The video feed was lost, with only the sound of D-2172 screaming and running away. After this, D-2172 was considered lost, and attending researcher Dr. Peterson ordered that the team pull his harness back out. Agent Collins protested, saying they had no evidence of D-2172's death. Peterson relented, and they waited for the signal. Eventually, it came. 2 tugs on the tether, D-2172 asking to be pulled out. But when they pulled the tether, an empty harness emerged. Something was caught on it, holding it in the pit as the team tried to draw it out. It was D-2172's hand, gripping the harness as hard as it could. The harness broke free from his grasp, and his hand flailed, searching for his chance at escape. Another D-Class rushed to help, grabbing a hold of 2172's hand. Another D-Class joined in, along with Dr. Lafayette and Private Aoude, and the group worked together to pull the fallen man from the pit. Only as they pulled, they realized that only his arm had come out, and it was continuing to come. More and more and more of his arm, stretching out to 3 meters in length, bending and snapping at gruesome angles. They were too late after all. He was already gone. Despondent, the group released him, and he sank back down into the pit with the rest. There is currently no way for the Foundation to remove the Crooked Man from Tembe for containment. Instead, they must maintain a strong presence in the town, monitoring the community via a temporary Site 5. This area includes 2 houses and a building near the local hospital. Their Foundation officers will track any signs of SCP-783 activity, as well as continue to research the entity's nature and any potential weaknesses it may have. In the event that SCP-783 becomes active, all of its victims must be removed from the site of the attack. Their bodies must be incinerated, and they will be added to the case file. For now, there is not much anyone can do but wait and see, because the cycle isn't broken yet. It's only a matter of time. The Crooked Man is coming back to do his crooked deeds. Be thankful the Foundation knows what everybody needs. If you want to stay yourself, protect your muscle, flesh, and bone, then you'd better heed this warning. Don't stay home at night alone. Working at the SCP Foundation can really get your appetite going. After spending a rough shift monitoring the acid levels in SCP-682's tank, or performing the rituals necessary to keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, sometimes you just need a quick snack to hold you over before you return to the old grind. Problem is, at the SCP Foundation, even the break room can be perilous. Dr. Dan is notorious for pilfering pudding cups from the communal fridge, and ever since the administrator himself stole your tuna sandwich, you just don't feel safe spending your lunch break on site anymore. But this presents its own series of issues. You only have an hour for lunch, and obviously you can't order in due to security issues. Also, if you're eating off-site, you have even less time to finish your lunch because the site you're currently stationed at is relatively remote. We're talking at least a half-hour round trip to actually get to somewhere, so you're gonna need your food fast. And when it comes to fast food, few eateries are as prolific as the Golden Arches, McDonald's. And just to clarify, this video is not sponsored. We're gonna tell you about a horrifying anomalous secret that this company really doesn't want you to know about. Let's not think about that just yet though. Your stomach is rumbling, and you need that quarter pounder so bad that even being trapped in the red reality with Dr. Scranton couldn't stop you from getting it. When you finally arrive, you buy your typical order. A quarter pounder with french fries, a coffee, and a McFlurry. You see Dr. Clef a few tables down enjoying a box of chicken nuggets and ketchup, but decide not to engage. As you sit and enjoy your meager little lunch, knowing you'll probably be coordinating the cleaning efforts of SCP-173's containment chamber by the end of the day, your eyes drift over to something even more unsettling. Happy, the current mascot for McDonald's Happy Meals. You can't help but shudder. You've seen some pretty horrific things on the job. Nightmarish things. You fear no monster, but that thing, it scares you. Those big, soulless eyes, the wide, gaping maw full of 2 white teeth. Its diabolical sneakers. No child should ever have to look at that. You can't help but wonder, whatever happened to Ronald McDonald, the hamburger-happy clown that shilled fast food to you throughout your childhood? What is he up to now? Well, we have an answer for you, but I'll warn you, you may not be quite as eager to suck down a Big Mac and a Diet Coke after hearing this. Ronald McDonald, first introduced as the company's mascot in 1963, had a pretty good run, before finally being largely phased out by the company in the mid-2010s for a greater focus on the nasty little box homunculus. You can thank John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and those goofballs dressed up as clowns back in 2016 for that. But like anyone who loses favor stateside, Ronald had a prosperous career ahead of him outside the country. Well, not the Ronald we know, at least. You see, in an undisclosed cattle farm in 2004, most likely in North America, a monster was born. a horrific abomination birthed from a cow, like many have theorized about SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness. But this nasty little creature wasn't a giant heart with a stinger and scorpion legs. In many ways, it appeared superficially humanoid, save for its stark white skin, its thick red lips, and its full head of bright, frizzy red hair. But that was only the start of the unnerving strangeness exhibited by this miracle child. It was born with white gloves and long, clownish shoes seemingly grafted to its feet. Fresh from birth, the creature was huge, with a disproportionately large head and wide, disgusting pores that seemed to perpetually leak fry oil. The creature was unresponsive to any kind of external stimuli, perhaps suggesting it was brain dead, and it remained completely dormant most of the time. While most people would have screamed, run away, or called the police, the farmers at this particular cattle farm decided to let it ride and see how this whole nightmarish affair played out. That sense of curiosity and patience would soon pay off for them financially. It didn't take long for the creature to grow. The bigger it got, the more it looked like a giant mutant version of McDonald's iconic mascot, Ronald McDonald. And this wasn't just a coincidence either. It turned out that this monster was somehow intrinsically linked to the McDonald's brand, because once a day, the creature would horrifically unhinge its jaw and begin to barf out a huge quantity of McDonald's food. And we're not talking about raw materials that are converted into McDonald's food. The creature, later dubbed SCP-5962, vomited out fully packaged McDonald's products. The owners of this clownish monster had just hit the lottery, so to speak. While the particulars of the deal are unclear, they somehow contacted a representative of the McDonald's Corporation based in China. In exchange for presumably a large sum of money, Chinese McDonald's operatives covertly entered the country and shepherded the now massive creature over to a McDonald's-owned warehouse in Beijing. By this point, it was around 4 meters tall and weighed over 5 tons. It was kept inside a cage and housed at some cost, but soon enough, the creature was paying for itself. As we mentioned before, the creature constantly secreted fry oil, which was siphoned off for use in preparing McDonald's food across the country. The huge quantity of packaged food that it vomited out every day was also shipped off to restaurants across the country, making the Chinese branch of McDonald's incredibly financially successful. They were able to make an almost complete profit on all of these foods and drinks, once transport costs were subtracted, of course. SCP-5962 had become McDonald's China's best-kept secret, but of course no secret this sensational could stay under wraps forever, no matter how much people in the warehouse were paid or threatened for their silence. If your day job was siphoning grease off of a giant mutant clown for the purpose of preparing McDonald's food across the country, there'd be no way you wouldn't speak to somebody about it. Nobody knows whose loose lips sunk this incredibly profitable ship, but rumors began to spread around Beijing about a huge clown inside of a McDonald's packaging facility. That was when local field agents of the SCP Foundation finally took notice. 2 agents, Jonathan Zhang and George Nagasaw, were dispatched to perform an infiltration mission along with a team of backup personnel. They entered the warehouse, apprehending any employees they found. As they and their reinforcements reached the northern side of the facility, they found SCP-5962 with a heavy collar around its neck, chained to the ground like King Kong, as McDonald's employees wheeled away carts of packaged food. Neither of the attending agents were fans of McDonald's food, but even then, just seeing this horrible display was enough to make them feel nauseous. The creature was taken and contained by the SCP Foundation, who conducted a number of tests on it. They found that the monster had no real internal organs save for 27 interconnected stomachs. Genetically, they also found that the creature was far more cow than human. The same could sadly not be said for the food that SCP-5962 was vomiting out. Seriously, if you were already feeling a little queasy from all this, we need to warn you that this is the part where things get really vile. Let's talk about what the McDonald's food barfed up by SCP-5962 was actually made out of. As we mentioned earlier, the food exuded by the creature was genetically human, with DNA often matching that of people who are alive and in no way affected by this anomalous process. Tests have indicated that certain foods, condiments, and beverages correspond to more specific types of bodily tissue and liquid. For example, the bacon and fries were shown to be cartilage and ligaments. The bread turned out to be made from hair, nails, and skin. The coffee was liquefied fecal matter. The chicken nuggets were made from fingers, ovaries, and testes. Even the water was a mix of saline and sweat. And of course, the ice cream was comprised of pus, bone marrow, feces, and nasal mucus, depending on the flavor. You get the idea. We'll stop listing off examples before you lose your lunch, but rest assured, all of the food produced by SCP-5962 was made of human organic matter. When the SCP Foundation interviewed Mr. Chen, the manager of the facility where SCP-5962 was being held, before his amnestic treatment, he seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing. As far as he was concerned, the food still tasted exactly the same as regular McDonald's food, and it didn't appear to have any adverse health effects beyond what you could expect from regular non-anomalous fast food. It's actually less cruel and disturbing than the slaughterhouses where the meat is typically obtained. Mr. Chen also contested that SCP-5962 wasn't all that dangerous either. The only time it ever performed an offensive action was when an employee of the enemy fast food franchise, Burger King, entered its vicinity. The creature vomited a stream of hot coffee at the corporate interloper like a fire hose until he left, suggesting that it does have some kind of strange inherent loyalty to the McDonald's company. But still, other than this isolated incident, the creature has never even displayed sentience. It was a big, strange, clownish McDonald's food dispenser. When questioned about the origins of SCP-5962, Mr. Chen once again underplayed the strangeness of the situation, saying that he'd heard rumors the farm that sold him SCP-5962 had also sold other strange, anomalous creatures to eager buyers in the US. The farm, which we can only assume is situated right next to a radioactive waste dump, was also behind SCP-4158, also known as Big Charlie. This giant omnivorous and seemingly immortal mutant cow is believed to have been birthed from a non-anomalous cow sold to the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse. It looked hideous and seemed to suffer from a wide variety of health issues, leading to the employees at the slaughterhouse trying to put the creature out of its misery. However, no matter how hard they tried to kill the monster, it just wouldn't die. Its bones were pretty much indestructible, and no matter how much of its flesh was cut off, it just kept growing back, causing no ill effects to the creature itself. Eventually, the slaughterhouse workers tried cooking and eating the meat, leading to them discovering it tasted just as good as non-anomalous meat. Much like the Chinese McDonald's and SCP-5962, the workers had just hit the lottery with Big Charlie. As long as they kept feeding the monster, which ate everything from bricks to other non-anomalous cows, it provided a pretty much limitless supply of meat, giving them unprecedented economic prosperity. In other words, Big Charlie was a literal cash cow. Jeff Fine, the slaughterhouse director, even started worshipping Big Charlie as a kind of demigod by drinking his blood. He believed that Big Charlie was a savior, sent to lift them all out of their struggle and desperation. Sadly for them, the SCP Foundation sent them right back when Big Charlie escaped their slaughterhouse, and Foundation field agents found, secured, and contained it. It was a sad day for the Butcher's Block. So, what have we learned today? Whether you're in the US of A or the Chinese heartland, if you're chowing down on fast food, you really have no idea where it came from. I mean, we kind of knew that already, but for all we know, the food you're enjoying could have just been vomited up by a giant fat clown, or cut from the flesh of a mutated cow. Just think about that next time you're enjoying a burger. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We'll all probably still eat it. Despite the fact that it covers the majority of our planet's surface, we know remarkably little about the oceans. While we know how to navigate them and how to send boats from one continent to another, the surface of the water is usually a calm, safe place where all you expect to encounter are other humans and the occasional storm. What's below the surface is another story. Scientists estimate that we've only explored maybe 5% of the world's oceans and what lies in them. On top of that, they estimate that we've only encountered and cataloged 10% of marine life. That means that 95% of the ocean is unexplored and untouched by humans, and that 90% of the ocean species have never even been seen by humans. It makes you think, just what kind of stuff is down there? It could be anything. Even mundane ocean life can be deeply strange and bizarre. There are sharks that live for over 300 years, blind fish that only hunt by smell, jellyfish that are reborn whenever they die. If normal ocean life is this terrifying and explanation-defying, what kinds of anomalies could the oceans we swim and fish in be playing host to? One such anomaly is SCP-835. But before we get started, SCP-835 is an old file. It's one of the earliest in the Foundation's database, in fact. Like many of the Foundation's earliest documents, it's been heavily redacted and expunged, to the point where large blocks of the text are missing, not to mention the fact that it's been locked behind a content filter. But SCP-835 is unique not because it's been expunged and redacted, but because it's had them lifted. Versions of the file and its addendum that are cleared of the redactions have been declassified and released by order of 05-11 to all viewers. For some reason, whatever was so secret about this file no longer applies. But before we take a look at the declassified documentation, let's look at the old version to get an idea of what exactly we're dealing with here. The attached image for SCP-835 is, to put it simply, gross. It's what appears to be some kind of bone or muscular growth underwater, a bit like coral, but much more organic and flesh-like in shape. The growth is mostly white and brown, but large sections are grown over with what looks like some kind of black mold spores. It's large too, almost the size of a person's chest, and seems to continue out of frame. The caption is simply, "Still image from recording 81. It's not even clear if this growth, whatever it is SCP-835 or not. Continuing on to the file, the object class is Keter, and the special containment procedures are lengthier than most articles and very detailed. They explain that SCP-835 must constantly be monitored and checked to see if it's growing or expanding. In the event that it becomes hostile to Foundation personnel, something known only as Suppression Tactic A-A6 is to be activated until it ceases any hostile action. The anomaly has to be contained in the open ocean rather than moved to a water tank or such, because of the highly aggressive response of SCP-835 to confinement for any length of time. So whatever it is, it's alive, it's expanding and growing, and seems capable of knowing when it's being placed into containment and responding angrily. It's not only sentient, it's intelligent and aware. They go on to say that SCP-835's waste has to be immediately collected and contained, and that it is to be fed 2 times every day, though what exactly is going to be fed to it is redacted in this version of the file. It can also be moved to a new location up to 2 times a year, but only if the current location can't support it anymore, and if the move has been approved by the site directors. On top of that, personnel have to stay away from SCP-835, at least 15 feet. They also need to have safety harnesses attached to winches on the boat. If anyone so much as touches SCP-835, all of the winches will activate and rapidly yank all the divers back to the boat. From there, Suppression Tactic A-A6 is again instituted. But there is another line. If a staff member touches SCP-835 and is captured by it, then the anomaly is to be monitored around the clock until the subject has been released. Very ominous containment procedures. This predator, if it is a predator, has a penchant for consuming people and needs to be avoided at all costs. But if someone is caught, it releases them after a while. The description of the document clears some things up. SCP-835 is a mass of polyps, or tissue growths, that resemble coral. It's huge and heavy, though its full weight is again redacted, and the individual polyps are also huge, over a meter long, much longer than any known coral species. The central mass is oval and has a huge 3-meter-long polyp on each side of it, but can't move or budge because of its huge weight. Instead, it uses huge tentacles extending from the polyps to dig into the ground and anchor it in place against the ocean currents. These are the same tentacles that are used for feeding and are covered in a sticky glue-like adhesive. They're not just long and strong either. Tests have recorded them damaging stainless steel plating. And speaking of plating, SCP-835 is covered in it. Not steel, but some kind of organic coral that's much harder than steel and couldn't be broken by even diamond drill bits. All the Foundation could get were small samples, and if that wasn't bad enough, the Foundation's positive that SCP-835 is growing, like the containment procedure suggested, and it's growing fast, up to 50 pounds in a single day if it's left uninterrupted. But it can't be stopped. It reacts to certain chemicals that make it close up like an oyster and stop growing for 24 hours at a time. Based on that, the Foundation's been able to develop and use a chemical cocktail to force it to halt. The aforementioned Suppression Tactic A-A6. However, the results of testing it have been redacted. In case the anomaly wasn't disgusting enough, it also vomits. That's right. Every couple of hours it expels a large mass of some liquidy sludge material from both sides, so to speak. After sample testing, the scientists realized it really is vomit. Well, part of it. The substance is mostly semi-digested food, fecal material, and semen, but also contains live samples of biohazardous viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Some that the Foundation haven't even encountered before SCP-835. One of these bacteria, 835-I5, is a big problem for containing SCP-835. But exactly why that is unfortunately expunged from the file as well. Between the lethal witch's brew of dangerous diseases and the diamond hard shell that covers SCP-835's internal guts, it is nearly impossible to neutralize or even damage it. Even if you do crack the shell, the diseased fluid inside would leak out and infect you full of diseases in seconds. Wow, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, so SCP-835 is a really nasty customer. I mean, just by looks alone, it's easy to tell 835 is probably nothing to mess with. But a simple visual of the thing in your line of sight does no justice in showing how actually dangerous and disgusting it really is. If you try to break it, you get your immune system overrun by a cocktail of diseases, if it doesn't manage to eat you first. The document has one addendum. An after-action report by a member of Mobile Task Force Zeta-9, the notorious Mole Rats. The Mole Rats are one of the Foundation's most elite teams of Special Operation Troops. Like all MTFs, they have a very specific specialization, one thing they do better than anyone else in the world. For Zeta-9, it's cramped spaces. The task force is highly trained in exploring dangerous constricted areas, especially those that lie underground. From subterranean caves to endless staircases and basement labyrinths, the Mole Rats are the best of the best at getting in and getting out. The Mobile Task Force Zeta-9 had been performing an investigation on SCP-835, albeit when it was considerably smaller, only a meager 4 tons, and it hadn't formed a second big polyp yet. Just like usual, 4 members of the Mole Rats were chosen to begin the investigation, equipped with underwater isolation suits to ward off any biological threats. Lieutenants C, Sergeants L and M, and Corporal H, a rookie team member who was training with them and was ordered to only observe. They took a small underwater drone with them, one that would come in very handy. At first, SCP-835 didn't act hostile or aggressive towards the members of the team. In fact, it even allowed members to swim up to it and touch it without reacting. They couldn't even tell if it was alive or not, so they sent the drone to approach the huge polyp on the north side, while they went around to the small entrance on the other side of the rock. Corporal H was told to remain there and make sure that the power cable to the drone didn't break off or snap. Everything seemed calm. Suddenly, the drone's claw arm jerked back, having gotten stuck in something, and began thrashing around. Not wanting to wake the creature, Corporal H moved forward and tried to free the claw, but then he became trapped too. The other members of the team heard him on the radio, screaming for them to come and help him, and that he'd been grabbed by some horrible tentacle thing that was dragging him towards the polyp that had opened up into a mouth. The incident left Lieutenant C a bit ruffled afterward. Jesus Christ, I can't do this, he was just a kid! It was his first mission, I should have kept my eye on him! After a moment, she composes herself and begins to explain what happened. The anomaly grabbed Corporal H, having fooled the rest of us. What we thought was the entrance to just some cave, while the polyp on the north side was the real entrance into SCP-835. The tentacles came out of its smaller polyps, grabbed Corporal H, and began dragging him in, while he thrashed around and screamed. The boat tried to pull in the winch, but from all the activity, the line snapped in two. Corporal H was pulled inside SCP-835 and eaten. The lieutenant explains that she swam over and hooked herself to his outstretched hand when the boat began winching her up. She said just as she assured him that they're going to be fine and that she's not letting go, her line snapped, and they were both suddenly pulled inside. She breaks for a moment, before describing the inside as like a wet, pulsing tube, like how intestines look on colonoscopies. They were both steadily being pulled in by the muscle contractions, what doctors call peristalsis, the way your body moves food down your throat and through your intestines. The only reason they weren't dissolved or crushed was because of the isolation suits they were wearing, but they still couldn't move. Corporal H had vomited in his suit, but they were both alive. The lieutenant, thinking fast, figured out that if they were moving through its body, they would come out on the other end in 72 hours. They had air and water in the suits, but little battery, and if the heat went out, they would freeze to death. She quickly killed all of the lights and power in both of their suits to the minimum, except the helmet lights so they could make sure that the other was still alive. The pair stayed like that for a whole day, with absolutely nothing but the creature's digestion and their own breathing. After a while, the corporal's face was visible. He looked tired and scared. She said that 13 hours in, the kid started talking and babbling. She calmed him down and they both slept for a bit, but were rudely awoken by falling into the stomach of the creature. They both fell out into a small chamber filled with liquid, and barely a moment later, their suits began to melt in the stomach acid. She yelled and they both ran for a hole in the wall, SCP-835's sphincter. At this point, it was very clear that they made it into the intestine, and it was worse than the stomach. I'm sure you can imagine how horrifying it must have been to be in the mix of this creature's fecal waste. Disgusted and vomiting, the corporal and lieutenant picked each other up, knowing that they were making strides of this terrible ordeal. But they reached a dead stop. The creature's rectal hole was tightly shut, blocking their escape. They decided to wait, knowing that it would have to excrete eventually, and after an undeterminate amount of time, any time spent in something's intestines waiting to be pooped out is too much time, the lieutenant was shot out into the sea, but without the corporal. She is obviously angry, telling the agents to do something expunged before declaring she needs a drink and to sleep. What a horrifying story. But there are gaps. Let's take a look at the uncensored documentation for SCP-835. First, let's go back to the containment procedures. What SCP-835 is to be fed is explained, any kind of local fish, but higher-level mammals if it goes into a rage state, including humans. In fact, it seems to calm down when digesting higher mammals. Maybe it's developed a taste for human flesh. In any case, the feeding should never happen without heavy supervision. Next, the results of performing tests on the samples of SCP-835 the Foundation was able to get. SCP-835 is no normal coral. It seems to be made from what can only be described as basic human biological components. The hard outer shell is super dense calcium, like your bones, but hundreds of times harder. The polyps are covered with the same kind of enamel that you'd find on your teeth, and the fleshy muscle that the tentacles are made of is mostly mutated tongue cells. The creature seems to have most of the biological systems we have, but they've all degraded or mutated into almost unrecognizability, except the digestive and reproductive systems, which are highly advanced. 835-I5, the bacteria unique to the anomaly, is explained. It's how SCP-835 reproduces. When vertebrates are infected with it, they will undergo a variety of symptoms, gaining huge amounts of weight despite always being hungry for things that normally can't be eaten, like wood and raw meat. Their skin will harden and form polyps across its surface. Their biological systems will slowly stop working, and they'll become aggressive. And then they will drastically reduce in intelligence and motion, except for the desire to enter the sea. Sound familiar? That's right. Being infected by it turns the victim into another SCP-835 instance, with no way to cure it. And just like it seems, SCP-835 is still somewhat aware and intelligent. At one point, this thing was a normal human. Just in case that's not horrible enough, the after-action report has also been thoroughly declassified. Let's take another look to see the real full story of what happened to Lieutenant C and Corporal H inside SCP-835. The first reveals when Corporal H was being pulled into the polyp. He was screaming and crying, begging for help. "Oh God, it's eating me! I don't want to die!" Command tells Lieutenant C to abort the mission, but she refuses to leave one of her men behind, holding his hand while hooking them together. Then the line snapped, and they were pulled in. Just as they were escaping the stomach and right as she hit the sphincter, she realized the walls of the stomach were lined with human faces, screaming and wailing and begging to be killed. She pulled her weapon out and began firing into them, and she would have melted if Corporal H hadn't pushed her through. In the intestine, the corporal began to complain of a rancid smell. She checked and realized he had a breach in his suit, but quickly patched it, but it was too late. She looked at his face and it was growing pustules already. They burst, spraying blood, and he begged to be put out of his misery. But when the lieutenant shot her gun at him, all it produced were empty clicks. She had wasted all the ammo on the crying stomach faces. Suddenly, tentacles burst through the corporal's faceplate and simultaneously pinned the lieutenant down. She managed to flip what had been the corporal over and wrestle with what was left of him before the sphincter into the stomach, where his body began to melt in the acid. But before it did, she saw the corporal's face smiling and said he loved her before he died. Then she felt a burst of energy and was shot through the exit. With a troubled gleam in her eyes, she stands there telling her story to the agent. She takes a second to gain some strength and then says, "I didn't make it out intact. My suit was breached, and I didn't even realize until I took it off and saw the rash on my skin." Realizing she's going to die, she suddenly puts the room she's in on lockdown and orders the debriefing agent to evacuate everyone else aboard immediately. Just before she kills the feed, she makes one request, that the Foundation not try to decontaminate the small boat, just to abandon ship and scuttle it on top of SCP-835, on top of the corporal. That way they can be together in some kind of sick resting place. SCP-835 is the horrible tale of things that can go wrong at the Foundation, and two people doing their best in a brutal situation. But with the modern containment protocols and ensuring people know what happened to the pair, the Foundation can ensure no one ends up like the lieutenant and the corporal again. D-181 was used to being picked as a test subject for the various dangerous and downright terrifying experiments and lab work the SCP Foundation had him perform at Secure Facility Site-32. He'd been working for the organization for nearly 5 years, and he considered every day he was alive a blessing, and you would too if you were a D-Class personnel. While no one's too sure on the exact methods the SCP Foundation uses to recruit its D-Class personnel, there are a few prevalent rumors, most of which you've surely heard before. Death row prisoners taken into custody by the Foundation to be unwilling lab rats, ordinary people that society wouldn't miss that were kidnapped off the streets, or sometimes just volunteers. Though we're not sure who in their right mind would willingly volunteer for one of the most degrading, dangerous positions in the entire Foundation. The truth about D-Class is that every site does it differently, and the Foundation is well aware of the controversy among its personnel that comes with recruiting and using D-Class personnel. Heck, some sites don't even have D-Class, citing their use as inhumane. But at Site-32, things were ordinary, and D-181 was one of the many D-Class personnel drafted into the Foundation via the United States prison system. Day in and day out, D-181 would have to perform tests and experiments, most of which he knew next to nothing about. Thankfully for him, D-181 had two benefits that made his stay at Site-32 a little easier. First, there was the fact that Site-32 was a low-priority facility. It was located far away from any major population centers, and overall lacked the expensive funding some of the larger sites had. The anomalies contained there were still pretty dangerous, but due to the lack of available funding, most of what the Foundation was able to afford at Site-32 was regulated to safe and Euclid-class objects. Now, as we all know, object class has nothing to do with danger levels, and instead is based on the difficulty the Foundation has containing a certain object more than anything else. So when a site such as Site-32 is underfunded, due to being less of a priority to the larger organization, they're typically only going to be containing the bare minimum in terms of expenses. That means less expensive containment and less elaborate objects for D-181 to work with. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, as nothing ever is in the SCP Foundation, but it was at least beneficial to have an understanding of what's going on in the various experiments D-181 had to perform throughout the day. The second thing D-181 appreciated about Site-32 was a little less conventional. The entire facility was staffed by women, with the exception of male personnel being used for testing purposes. The reason for this is due to a very specific detail about today's anomaly, which we'll get back to, but it was something that D-181 never took for granted. Of course, D-181 was an absolute buffoon when it came to dating, and relations between testing subjects and researchers were discouraged, and in some cases forbidden. However, he never gave up hopes that he might be able to now find a girlfriend, while living in a building that was less than 1% male in population. It is important that we state that D-181 was always respectful to women, and never stepped out of line, which, as far as D classes go, makes him top-tier boyfriend material. Maybe there's hope for him someday, so long as he survives the deadly daily grind of being on the lowest rung of the Foundation. While these two things kept D-181 as happy as someone could be while essentially being enslaved to the Foundation, there was a lot to be unhappy about in his position. First, there was the general danger that came with testing with anomalies every day, where anything and everything could go wrong, and your safety was never guaranteed. Then there were the dreams. Most of the time, D-181's waking state felt like a dream, so that meant the images his brain showed him at night were extra weird. The horrors and oddities that D-181 witnessed during the day always came back to haunt him at night, whether it was a stack of talking bowling balls attacking him in the grocery store, or a teacup that made his skin invert itself every time he drank it. The SCP objects D-181 worked with always cropped up in his dreams at night, and they always seemed to be worse. D-181 asked the other D-Class personnel stationed at the site if they had strange dreams too, and most of them agreed that they experienced them as well. Apparently working for the Foundation fired up the imagination in an extra special way that seeped into nighttime, when D-181 would ideally be receiving some well-deserved sleep from the strangeness of the day. But one dream was bothering D-181 significantly more than usual. It was a recurring one, happening again and again every few nights. The same series of events, playing out over and over again. The strangest part about it was that it didn't feel like a dream at all. D-181 would be laying in his bunk inside Site-32's D-Class barracks, desperately trying to fall asleep. Eventually, he would, but he wouldn't realize it. D-181 would feel like he was asleep, but he could still see the barracks around him, except he couldn't move at all. D-181 was experiencing a form of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon during falling asleep or waking up, where a person is unable to move or speak. Hallucinations during sleep paralysis are common, but the whole experience typically only lasts a few minutes. For D-181, it lasted a lot longer, and he was aware the entire time. So D-181 would be laying down in his bunk, trying to fall asleep, when he would suddenly become unable to move. Then, from across the room, he'd see the door to the barracks open. D-181 knew that the barracks were only accessible to the upper-ranking personnel, and they never came around. First, D-181 saw a large cylinder move itself slightly into the room. Then the figure it was attached to waddled its way through the door. A giant fabric doll, so big that it could barely fit itself into the door. If D-181 could scream, he would. He recognized the figure as an instance of SCP-2386, one of the anomalies he was working on. The doll walked slow and heavy, trying to not collapse over its own weight. It was made of pink fabric, with its face stitched together with thread forming a sly smile and 2 buttons for eyes. It was terrifying. What was even worse were the 2 pairs of wings on the doll's back, like the kinds you'd see on a butterfly or a moth. The brilliant patterns looked like they were made of cloth, sewn to a pair of ordinary insect wings, and completing the doll's patchwork appearance. The insect-doll combination stumbled towards D-181, moving across the barracks slowly and nearly falling over several times. The creeping terror of the doll's slow advance only made D-181 try to move more, but he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed and subject to whatever the doll was about to do to him. Eventually, the doll made it close to D-181's bunk, standing over the bed and staring at D-181 with its lifeless, button-eyed face. It just stood there, staring. D-181 was sweating, with tears in his eyes. He tried to scream again, but nothing came out. And then, to make matters worse, the barracks door opened again, and what made its way through shook D-181 to his very core. It was another doll, even bigger than the other one, and behind it was another doll, and then another. 4 dolls in total made their way into the room and stumbled over to D-181's bed. They continued to stare, crowding around the sleeping D-Class like he was a television set, and their favorite show was about to begin. Just when D-181 thought it couldn't get any worse, the dolls extended their stubby, felted hands over his face, all 4 of them moving in unison. And then they stopped, and D-181 heard their voices. Well, not their voices exactly, but voices nonetheless. High-pitched, barely human, childish voices started whispering to him. They weren't coming from the dolls, but they could talk. D-181 was positive this is what they'd sound like.
You're doing such a great job. You're the nation's greatest asset. We love you, D-181. We love you.
All of these seemingly innocuous phrases were things said to D-181 while he was surrounded by the giant dolls. On paper, they sound encouraging, but the context of the situation and the way they were said made them anything but. And this would continue for what seemed like hours, with the dolls crowding D-181 and speaking to him in his paralyzed state, shouting the most deceptively kind things possible over and over again, all while D-181 was aware the entire time. But before he would wake from this awful dream, one of the instances would lift their stubby hand forward, directly hovering over D-181's arm, and the doll's appendage would caress him, squeezing and playing with his arm like it were a toy. By morning when D-181 awoke from his dream, he felt like he was never asleep in the first place, and that he could remember every agonizing second of the past night's experience. This would continue almost every other night. As soon as D-181 would fall asleep, the doll dream would occur again. As soon as he woke up, he'd feel like he got next to no sleep the night before. It was draining him and inhibiting D-181 from performing his duties accordingly. One day during testing, D-181 fell asleep in the middle of an experiment and dropped an important component to the object he was working with, which nearly set the entire facility on fire. After that, D-181 knew that something had to change. D-181 recognized the dolls. They were instances of SCP-2386, which he had worked with previously. In fact, it was the experiments with SCP-2386 that injured D-181 on his right arm, causing an infectious spot to crop up. What caused this? And what exactly is SCP-2386? We'll get to all of that soon enough, but we need to focus on the dreams. It was 3 weeks into the dreams, 3 weeks since D-181 was injured during testing, and 3 weeks since D-181 had a good night's sleep. He met with Dr. Shaw, the head researcher in charge of SCP-2386 experimentation, and someone who worked with D-181 many times. Dr. Shaw and D-181 sat down and prepared an interview. She began,
"Good morning, D-181. You say you've been having recurring dreams."
D-181 shuffled in his seat a bit. "Yeah, hi, Doc. Ever since I got this thing, it wasn't that bad at first." D-181, of course, was talking about the red spot on his arm. Shaw asked him to explain the dreams, and D-181 did. He explained how he would be in his bunk, feeling almost awake but not quite, when giant versions of SCP-2386 would make their way into the room. They'd gather around his bed and stare at him, shouting things and caressing his infected spot. Dr. Shaw listened intently. D-181 was clearly shaken up from relaying the experience to another person. He continued, barely able to hold himself together. You see, something had changed the night before D-181 spoke to Dr. Shaw. For the first time, the dream was altered. Actually, last night they did something different. Another one came in. It had something with it. Looked like a baby one. It was all wrapped up in this white cloth. They said something about wanting to show me what I was working towards. They pulled back the cloth over its head and it was a bug's head. Woke me right the heck up. A baby with a bug's head was definitely strange imagery, but Dr. Shaw was unsure what it all could mean. She knew SCP-2386 were insect-like, and with the way D-181's infection was looking, her brain began concocting a strange but potentially true theory, one that wasn't looking good for D-181. But before we get into that, let's talk about what SCP-2386 really is. They're known among Foundation personnel at Site-32 as Pink Ladies, and they are a diminutive species that outwardly resembles patchwork dolls made of traditional fabric. Think that creepy Raggedy Ann doll your grandmother has, but 10 times more degraded, a whole lot more pink, and straight-up insectoid in nature. They're not as big as the ones in D-181's dream, but they're actually as scary, with stitched-on faces and a pair of moth wings on their backs. In fact, the actual SCP-2386 instances range from only 7 to 9 centimeters tall. Autopsies on dead instances of SCP-2386 showed resemblances to human botflies and silkworms, two species of insects that are absolutely nasty. It is terrifying to imagine something so outwardly cuddly could look so downright ugly on the inside, but that's what SCP-2386 are. But don't try hugging them either. Their cotton fiber exoskeleton is as durable as it is gross, and they're not the kind of cuddly doll you'd want to take to bed at night. In the wild, SCP-2386 are found in hives, resembling similarly patterned seat cushions. Big mounds of cloth host to tons of these tiny terrors, with the biggest hive the Foundation ever came across being the size of a large sofa. These hives are commonly found near suburban environments, and sometimes even inside occupied housing. Imagine coming home to find a brand new sofa inside your house, and then realizing that it's actually home to thousands of SCP-2386 instances. When SCP-2386 leaves their colonies, it is primarily to feed on smaller insects and seek out hosts for reproductive purposes. Despite their cute but gross appearances, SCP-2386 become hostile if approached by males of any species and will target them accordingly. That's why Site-32 only employs male personnel for testing purposes. As soon as they're within range of a male subject, SCP-2386 will outstretch one of its appendages and extend a pair of scissor-like claws from it before swarming the male. This is what happened to D-181, which resulted in the red infected spot on his arm. Conversely, female subjects in the presence of SCP-2386 are treated entirely differently, with the instances caring for them, presenting them with small gifts, and attempting to play with them. During the spring and summer seasons, SCP-2386 will enter their mating season and cease their hostilities towards males. Instead, they'll treat them with the same level of kindness they do with females. But this kindness is just a front. When given the opportunity, SCP-2386 will slice a small incision into the male subject and pump them full of about 30 to 65 eggs underneath their skin. Within 24 hours, the incised area will resemble patterned cloth, and genetic tests reveal it to be composed of the same material as SCP-2386's hives. In the weeks that follow, this area will spread across the subject's body, and eventually, it will open to reveal fully grown adult instances of SCP-2386, who burst from the patchwork skin. Dr. Shaw recognized that this is what was happening to D-181, and immediately got him to Site-32's medical ward. D-181 was strapped down to the table and tried not to freak out over what he knew was about to happen. The dreams were acting as a warning, and SCP-2386 was clearly looking forward to having D-181 bear the next generation of insect dolls. Thankfully, Dr. Shaw caught the infection before the patchwork skin was able to fully take root, meaning that the eggs underneath D-181's skin were premature. Thankfully, there was still time. Surgery was carried out immediately, and the doctors weren't surprised to discover a colony of premature SCP-2386 eggs underneath D-181's arm. They were removed from the body and thrown into storage for further research purposes. D-181, after waking up from the surgery, thanked Dr. Shaw. At least now he wouldn't have to deal with those horrible dreams, and the stinging, swollen sensation underneath his arm. Unfortunately, he was still a D-Class personnel working for the Foundation, and would have many more intense experiences after this one. But D-181's gratefulness would soon subside. Within a few hours, D-181 began to ask Dr. Shaw if he could see SCP-2386's enclosure. He spent the past few weeks absolutely terrified of the species, but for whatever reason, he felt like he had unfinished business with the Anomalies. He wanted to see them again. Dr. Shaw became suspicious and understandably denied D-181 entrance from the enclosure, but this wasn't enough. D-181 became violent and tried to force himself into the containment chamber. He needed to see them. He couldn't explain why, but he felt incomplete. Eventually, D-181 was subdued and returned to his quarters, but his symptoms continued throughout the weeks. He was depressed and frequently made reference to SCP-2386 as being lost or unrightfully taken away from him. To Dr. Shaw, what was happening was clear. D-181 had been affected mentally upon receiving the SCP-2386 eggs. This was a safety mechanism induced by the anomaly in case of birthing complications, so D-181 would feel compelled to receive another batch of eggs into his body if the first batch was lost or damaged. It was disgusting, and Shaw was positive it would subside after a few more weeks. But what kept her up at night wasn't the same dreams D-181 had, or the terror of SCP-2386. It was the image of D-181 scared and out of his mind, clawing that containment chamber door, begging to be used as a host for SCP-2386's next batch of eggs. It was dark when you arrived at the office. Rain hammered down on the window pane, cold as death. Your therapist didn't expect a frantic call from you in the middle of the night, but he learned to take such surprises as they came. You called and drove over the second you had the dream. That terrible, terrible dream. He was sitting at his desk. When you entered the room, he gestured to the couch, encouraging you to take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Your heart was beating so hard you were worried it might break your ribs. Every time you blinked, you were getting flashes of the faces, those vacant, grinning faces, with wide eyes and mouths wrenched open, hanging slack. You hoped to whatever god or gods you believed in to never see those images outside of a dream. "What's been troubling you this time?" he asked. "I must admit, I'm getting a little worried about you. You seem so frantic over the phone." You tried your best to settle your breathing for long enough to speak, at which point you said the words you were hoping you'd never have to say again. "I had a dream about Cragglewood Park." You could almost hear the sigh your therapist was desperately trying to conceal from you. You'd been making so much progress, processing and working to move beyond that mysterious trauma, but then the dreams had come back, just as forceful and terrifying as they ever were. Your therapist asked you to recount it, just like he did so many times before. But of course, it's always the same. In the dream, you were a child, probably about 6 or 7, walking down a long, cobbled path, surrounded on all sides by these trees that looked like eerie amusement park animatronics. They had these big, rubbery faces, stretched into eerie smiles, like something off the cover of an old children's book. The Craggle trees. You somehow knew deep down in your heart that this was what the trees were called. This was, after all, Cragglewood Park. Those words, in whimsical cursive letters, were written on an aging sign somewhere deep in your mind. You could remember it as clearly as your own mother's face. And you weren't alone here in Cragglewood Park. There were other children, wandering down that cobbled road like a lost scene from The Wizard of Oz. The trees grinned and gyrated and sang up against a painted forest background. Wait, was it painted? Or did it just seem somehow unreal? The memories were getting hazy here. The same goes for the faces of the other children. They were smudged out, forgotten. Why were you here? Why were any of you here? And where were your parents in all this? But those thoughts were blotted out by the singing of those awful trees. You couldn't remember the words, but the music was so clear. The haunting notes of a calliope organ, like a collapsing memory of a day at the circus. You and the other children were all walking in the same direction, as though in a trance. What were you walking towards? The calliope only got louder with every step. A boy with a smudged-out face to the left of you tried to speak, but his words were muffled. You couldn't hear anything over the music and the terrible, garbled singing of all the animatronic trees. Then there were glowing lights and colors as you approached the end of the road. Something big, moving in time to the music. A grand, old carousel, slowly grinding to a halt to let on the next wave of children. You and the others just stood there and watched it. Moments later, half of the crowd of assembled children, the boy standing next to you included, began to step onto the carousel. The light got brighter and the singing got louder. By the time you reached the end of recounting your dream to your therapist, you realized that your cheeks were wet with tears. You told him you'd do anything to get the dreams to stop. Anything. Your therapist just nodded. and made a note in his journal. "I'll get in touch with someone who specializes in this kind of thing," he said. "Try to get some rest in the meantime. It can be detrimental to obsess about this kind of thing." But how could you not obsess? The second you got home, you did what you always did after having another Cragglewood Park dream. You went straight to the forums. After all, the most frightening thing about the Cragglewood dream was the fact that you weren't the only one having it. A number of people had congregated on a niche online paranormal forum to discuss their eerily similar experiences. Dreams filled with singing uncanny trees, half-forgotten children, and the hazy horrors of Cragglewood Park. Each member of the forum alerted the others whenever they had the dream again and threw any new information into the pot. They came from all over the world, different ages, backgrounds, and countries, making it impossible that they'd all actually visited a place like Cragglewood Park at some point in their past, and really the only thing they had in common, other than the dream itself, was the fact that they were all only children while in them. None of them could explain the dream. Perhaps with almost 8 billion people on Earth, it could be a coincidence that this handful would have these peculiar dreams. Perhaps that's all it was. Strange dreams. A few days later, a stranger arrived at your door, telling you that they were referred to you by your therapist. They heard about the dreams, about Cragglewood Park. In fact, they dealt with similar cases in the past, and if you'd be willing to answer a few questions, they may even have a viable treatment for the strange dreams that have been assailing you for years now. What could go wrong? Anything that could stop you from seeing those awful tree faces would be good. You relayed everything that you'd previously told your therapist, every detail of the dream, the rough number of times it reoccurred, and even the support group for the other sufferers that you frequented online. After you answered all of the stranger's questions, they told you that in order to seek treatment for your strange dreams, you would only need to show up at a nearby building and tell them who you are. They told you that this is a highly confidential and experimental procedure, so it would need to be kept secret. You sign a non-disclosure agreement and happily submit to all their conditions. You'll do anything to stop dreaming about Cragglewood Park, even agree to what you don't know is amnestic treatment from the SCP Foundation, or testing to see if erasing memories can suppress the Cragglewood Park dreams. You were among the first group of guinea pigs for that experiment, but hey, if it works, right? And for a few weeks, it did. You submitted yourself to regular amnestic treatment sessions at a local Foundation front business disguised as a legitimate medical center. You were skeptical at first. You'd tried every therapy and over-the-counter sleeping pill you could get your hands on. You tried meditation, regression, hypnosis, positive subliminals. Nothing had banished down the haunting dreams of Cragglewood Park. Those trees, those faces, those awful tinny songs. But to your immense relief, this new course of treatment seemed to hold strong. While taking the medication given to you by the Foundation, you got your best nights of sleep in years. A whole new world of comfort and peace. But then came a problem. There were supply issues. You'd need to take a few weeks off the course. And just as soon as you stopped taking the regular course of medications, the second your head hit the pillow and you drifted off to sleep, you were right back in Cragglewood Park. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. Perhaps the nightmares would go on forever. You'd spend every evening with those other faceless children always wondering, who were they? What happened to them? Little did you know there were no supply issues. The Foundation just wanted to test the viability of amnestic treatment as a long-term solution to the Cragglewood Park dreams, or as they dubbed them, SCP-2571. Turns out the amnestics were only effective when the subjects of SCP-2571 were actively taking them. Given the Foundation tests have estimated around 0.05% of the world's population are affected by SCP-2571, with that number possibly on the rise by unknown means, consistent amnestic treatment for all affected was deemed to not be a viable solution. But if it's any consolation to you, you're not suffering alone. The SCP Foundation has an online bot known as I.O. Mandela, trawling the internet for any discussions relevant to SCP-2571. They also have a designated task force, MTF-57, also known as the Laughingstock, to investigate and follow up on cases related to the sinister Cragglewood Park. The Foundation has conducted thousands of interviews related to the subject, but only 3 are appended to the file, containing between them some revelations on Cragglewood Park that reveal it's actually far, far worse than a childish bad dream. Dr. Rayner, the research team leader for SCP-2571, conducted the first of the 3 pertinent interviews about SCP-2571, investigating the experience of one Rupert Ducasu. In many ways, Rupert's Cragglewood Park dreams were truly textbook ventures into this nightmare of an amusement park. He described venturing through the park saying, "I entered this theme park. It's like Disneyland but smaller. There's no rides, just this long winding road through the woods. Everything's bright and colorful like a cartoon. And then there's these trees all around me, but they've all got faces. And they're singing. They've got these dopey, cheerful looks, like in one of those old-time cartoons, right? And they just sing and laugh and sing." Like all the other accounts, he reported approaching a carousel with the other children. Half of the children got onto the carousel, and he and the others began to leave. At this point, Rupert became visibly distressed while recounting the tale and said, "Just as I'm getting ready to leave, I see something. A tiny tree sprouting up near my foot. It looks up at me. It's smiling with that big, dopey, happy grin. When I see it, that's when I start screaming. That's when I wake up." When Dr. Rayner asked Rupert why he started screaming, Rupert replied that the tree had his face. The interview concluded. Next, Dr. Rayner spoke to Janny Yearling, another victim of SCP-2571. Dr. Rayner shifted his line of questioning to the carousel specifically. Miss Yearling insisted that she never stepped onto the carousel herself. Some who did were smiling, others were crying. They hugged some of the children that chose to stay behind before they got on. The more she described what happened, the more distressed Miss Yearling seemed to become. She eventually broke down into mortified sobs from the recollection. When Dr. Rainier asked what was wrong, Miss Yearling said, one of the kids that got on. Why did he hug me? I don't even know who he was," before breaking down into horribly desperate, choked sobbing. The final interview, and what it led to, was the most eventful and disturbing of all. Why? Because this interview, conducted by Dr. Rainier with Randolph Blair, was the first time that a physical item in a subject's home proved that SCP-2571 may be much more than just a malicious dream. An old VHS videotape was found in Mr. Blair's attic, with the word Cragglewood scrawled across the top. When the Foundation made Blair watch the tape and asked him if he recognized any of the images in it, he told them that he only recognized them from nightmares. He theorized that perhaps he'd been shown the tape as a child, and it had traumatized him. The Foundation didn't think that was the case. Dr. Rainier pressed on and asked him about a few strange details, like the resemblance between himself and one of the 2 children in the video, and the strangely vacant front-facing bedroom in his childhood home. At this point, Dr. Rainier realized that Mr. Blair wouldn't be forthcoming for much longer. He decided to use that little time he had left to ask Mr. Blair one more question. Have you always been an only child? That question would forever go unanswered, but Dr. Rainier could now take an educated guess. The Foundation watched and analyzed the tape, finding it eerily similar to so many of the dreams that came before. A young Randolph Blair and another young child that the Foundation believed to be his brother wandered through Cragglewood Park with the others until they finally reached the carousel. There, Randolph said a tearful goodbye as his brother stepped up onto the carousel, knowing somehow that he would never be seen again. And as Randolph tried to leave in a panic moments later, he was cornered by another horrifying Craggle tree, this time with his brother's face singing in his voice. Because Cragglewood Park isn't a terrifying dream, it's a terrifying memory. Imagine if you could predict the future. Not perfectly, mind you, but with enough accuracy that brilliant enough minds, say the best and brightest of the SCP Foundation, could plausibly reverse engineer the main determinative factors that caused a certain timeline to form. Imagine if, through carefully studying these determinative factors, the Foundation could carefully shape the future into one that's more favorable for the human race than all the alternatives. The preferred option, if you will. Would this not be advantageous? Your next question is a very natural one given the circumstances. How does one predict the future in such a manner? Well, the answer is uncomplicated, but that doesn't by any means make it easy. You go there, spend a few months looking around, and then come back to report your findings. That's right, folks. We're not talking psychics and seers here. Prepare to expand your mind, and please don't worry if it all gets a little timey-wimey, because SCP-2003 is the SCP Foundation's self-made time machine. Even most of the staff at the SCP Foundation itself don't know much about SCP-2003 given the highly sensitive nature of the projects surrounding it. Much like SCP-2000 is a trump card securing our present in the case of a catastrophic XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, SCP-2003 is our prophylactic for such a thing happening in the foreseeable future. What's far more unique about SCP-2003 is that the SCP Foundation created this ace in the hole from scratch. The SCP-2003 time machine was invented over a 25-year period by reverse engineering the anomalous technology of 3 different classified anomalies and retrofitting them into our own non-anomalous framework. The massive machine is housed in Armed Site-47, a remote and well-guarded facility disguised as an oil refinery. While extensive records of SCP-2003's construction have been made by the Foundation, and it stands to reason that the machine could be reliably and successfully reproduced in a different context, even the most intelligent scientists taking part in the project couldn't explain how or why it actually operates. In the words of another mad inventor, it just works. The operating principle of SCP-2003 are relatively simple to understand. It is able to break the laws of the space-time continuum by immediately transporting anything or anyone placed in its central chamber to some point in the chronological future. The subjects transported forwards will remain in this future for several months, before instantaneously being transported back to the exact location they were standing in the future. In order to prevent some kind of unfortunate accident, like phasing back halfway through a wall and becoming unpleasant modern art, the Foundation has established a secure facility for travelers to head and wait out the rest of their time when their mission is complete. Through extensive testing, including that which was performed under the purview of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation has discovered a great deal about the nature of time travel via SCP-2003. We'll outline the most crucial caveats here, so what happens next makes a lot more sense to you. After all, if time travel was easy, everyone would do it. First, as we alluded to earlier, the data collected by SCP-2003 on the nature of the future is often unclear, imprecise, and unreliable. For example, the data collected from 2003 did provide extremely useful in predicting and preventing a massive security breach over at Site-19 in 1997. So naturally, when it predicted a devastating series of earthquakes off the west coast of the United States in 1999, an event that several agents sent through SCP-2003 observed directly, it came as a shock to everyone when nothing happened. The Foundation discovered, following this, that all predictions needed to be contextualized through heaps of metadata for it to be of any real use in predicting or preventing our specific future. The Foundation also discovered that certain individuals had a strangely disproportionate effect on the unfolding of future events. Let's say, for example, SCP-2003 discovers that a new type of nuclear weapon will be invented in 2028 and quickly adopted by a number of leading nations by 2030. And by 2035, tensions will rise, sabers will rattle, and this nuclear weapon will be used en masse to destroy human society as we know it. Naturally, in order to prevent this, the Foundation might see to it that certain groups of nuclear scientists, certain generals, and certain world leaders get liquidated. And yet another trip into the future shows that this massive nuclear war was not averted. But why? Because it just so happens that this event was inexplicably tied to the birth of a little boy named James Hoskins in Saskatoon circa 2025. Despite little Jimmy Hoskins seemingly having nothing to do with the actual development of the technology, seeing as he's only 10 years old when the bombs start falling. The Foundation scientists working under Project XN Shepherd keep a database of all these highly determinative individuals, also known as magnifier individuals, so they can keep tabs on how they're affecting any future timelines. Speaking of future timelines, we're afraid to tell you that this penultimate caveat isn't exactly a pleasant one. There are few to any cohesive future timelines where humanity survives long term. Bummer, right? The Foundation calls these loose timelines determinative sets, and in the majority of them, human civilization collapses, all humans die, and in some cases, the Earth becomes completely uninhabitable to all forms of life. The Foundation is currently seeking a more optimistic option through controlled manipulations of the casual stream in our time. But currently, all we have is the preferred option, Option XN. And if you're someone who would jump at the chance to travel into the future and take a gander at all the wondrous or terrifying sights, there's actually one pretty major caveat of SCP-2003 that we've been playing rather close to the chest. Early Foundation tests found out that the time travel process via SCP-2003 is extremely damaging to plant and animal tissue. Rather than just going on a wacky time travel adventure like Doctor Who or Austin Powers, it'd be a little more like stepping into a giant microwave while dressed in a spacesuit made of aluminum foil. You're gonna die a horrible death. But there is one silver lining. Well, maybe not silver from your perspective, probably more like pewter. The Foundation has discovered a way to viably send human-adjacent subjects through time with SCP-2003 without instantaneous death. We just can't promise that you're going to like it. You see, the one kind of organic tissue that seems to survive the SCP-2003 time travel process is the human brain and nervous system. Due to the highly controlled nature of Project XN Shepherd, the Foundation can't just send in D-classes to do the job. They instead use actual agents, though mostly ones who are nearing or beyond retirement, or are suffering from a terminal illness. These agents are dosed on a course of anti-anxiety, antidepressant, and antipsychotic chemotherapy to toughen their minds for the horrors to come. Though the exact nature of these horrors is kept secret from them until it's already happened. You may be familiar with one of the Foundation's most well-known front companies, Boston Dynamics, as well as one of their most famous products, the robotic quadrupedal probe known as Big Dog. Well, in order to send a sentient being through time without them being completely destroyed by SCP-2003, the agent's brain and nervous system are entirely removed from their body and transported into the body of a modified Big Dog. Still think it'd be fun to time travel? Hey, don't look so nervous! For everyone who agrees to be part of an SCP-2003 mission and survives, you'll get one hell of a pension. Or at least your family will, if that's any consolation. Now that you understand all this, let's come clean about this mysterious Project XN Shepherd we've been alluding to throughout the video. It all started with a letter to the heads of the SCP-2003 research project from O5-7, a member of the legendary O5 Council that instructs the Foundation in all that it does. The letter read, "Up until this point, all attempts at future intervention using SCP-2003 have been limited in scope and scattershot in nature. I have seen the wisdom in this approach. It is informed by painstaking contingency planning and risk-benefit evaluation. The past 18 months of reports, however, have promise. If we are bold enough to seize the initiative, we may have found a way out here. The price, though, there's always a price, as you well know. Consider this note an official change in policy. As of today, all efforts at intervention are now aimed at bringing about and preserving XN. Designated magnifier individuals associated with XN are to be protected from undue interference at the expense of all other priorities. In particular, Nuru Diang must be allowed to die in the manner most observations have predicted for her. If anything at all changes in that regard, make it happen. I trust that you're familiar enough with the rest of the determinative sets to understand why we're going this way." So, in short of all the potential timelines, O5-7 wants the researchers assigned to SCP-2003 to ensure that the timeline XN is the one that actually comes to be, seeing as it's preferable to the alternatives, hence Project XN Shepherd. You're probably wondering, what happens in Timeline XN that makes it the most desirable outcome possible? Well, things continue as normal. Everything from anomalous activity to social unrest to environmental factors stay pretty much the same as time goes on, until 2349 when a giant 22-kilometer asteroid strikes the Earth and wipes out the majority of humanity in an instant. Following this, the world becomes unfit for human habitation. Hey, don't look so glum. You'll all be dead by then. Well, except Dr. Bright. Sorry again, Jack. we at least get a nice 3 centuries before we're wiped from the cosmic table. Your next question is probably, if the preferred option has humanity being wiped out by a giant asteroid in a little over 300 years, what are all the other ones? Aren't we entitled to a multiple-choice future if we don't feel comfortable with being completely annihilated by an asteroid before we're even halfway to the year 3000? Well, we'll give you a little tasting platter of potential timelines, and you can take your pick. There was the narrowly avoided Scenario XB, where things progressed in a similar fashion to Scenario XN, except a massive gamma-ray burst from the sun in April 2017 wiped out all life on Earth within 38 seconds. Then there's Scenario XE, where the birth of an unnamed boy in Turkmenistan combined with the election of Sir William Entwistle as Prime Minister of New Zealand in 2049 leads to a world-destroying nuclear exchange between Israel and Greater Indonesia in 2058. Any attempts to stop it just make it happen sooner. Or what about Scenario XH? Here, a deadly mutated form of influenza causes the deaths of over 1 billion people worldwide. Combating this threat causes increased cooperation between world governments that actually resulted in a huge net improvement for global peace and quality of life. It seems unrealistic, we know, but SCP-2003 doesn't lie. However, despite things going well, all known life on Earth just vanishes on July 29, 2059. It's a hell of an unpleasant twist after things start going so well for once. In Scenario XO, the anomalous increases in frequency and magnitude in 2037. This leads to a broken masquerade scenario where the Foundation's web of secrecy collapses, and anomalous chaos reigns across the globe. The Foundation's members are hunted and killed, and world governments attempting to weaponize the anomalous leads to a new arms race that wipes out all of humanity by 2048. Or maybe Scenario XU is more your cup of tea. In this one, the sun collapses, leading to eternal darkness and massive temperature drops. Inexplicably, humans still survive, but are in a state of constant, unmoving agony. And maybe, if you just really love spiders, you'll get a kick out of Scenario XX, where a mysterious pathogenic protist causes the majority of humanity to fall in love with the Brazilian wandering spider, one of the few spiders that pose an actual threat to humans. The diverting of all resources meant to keep humans alive to instead breeding the spiders, combined with many people being killed by the resulting spiders, leads to 6 billion deaths in the early 2030s. But hey, you'll get to see some pretty great spiders if that's your thing, I guess. Scenario XN is hardly a picnic. Nobody likes the idea of facing an Armageddon straight out of Armageddon, when that asteroid kills all life on Earth in 300 years. But while it undeniably isn't perfect, it may just be the best option we've got. Isn't the future amazing?
Russell's back was pressed against the wall, his shuddering hands gripping the fire axe. The low emergency lighting filling the corridor indicated the lockdown was still in effect, although that was simultaneously a blessing and a curse. Sure, it meant that thing couldn't get out, hopefully, but it also meant that Russell was stuck in the wing of the facility with it. He had no idea if anyone else was left. He hadn't seen what had happened to Carpenter. Maybe it got him, or perhaps he had managed to give it the slip at the last second. There was no way of knowing for sure. It had all started so simply, so innocently, and with such noble intentions. If he had known it would lead to all this madness, Russell would have never put his name down on the request form. The SCP Foundation had been working on a way to neutralize or cure SCP-610 for what felt like forever. To one team of scientists, the infamously so-called flesh that hates was a fascinating organism. It was a highly contagious sarkic skin disease, isolated entirely within a small area of Siberia. That on its own wasn't enough to pique the interest of the research team led by Dr. Carpenter, including his hand-picked star researchers Russell and David, along with their assistant Clennon and Dr. Botten, an expert on infectious diseases who had recently joined their efforts to provide his specialist knowledge. What did captivate all of them, however, was what SCP-610 did when it infected a human being. The disease would trigger aggressive and uncontrollable mutations within its infected and could virtually rewrite their entire physiology in a heartbeat. The flesh that hates was capable of transforming a person's body into a horrifying fleshy mass of limbs and matter that barely resembled a human being anymore. And in addition, the infected individuals would retain some level of awareness, attacking any uninfected person with extreme hostility. There had long been chatter amongst some other research teams studying SCP-610 about devising a way to weaponize the disease. If they could somehow create a variant that didn't turn people into monsters, or at least cause the fleshy abominations to die shortly after mutation, then the Foundation or another interested party could deploy the flesh that hates as a biological weapon. Dr. Carpenter had long abhorred the idea, instead searching for a way to completely reverse the effects of an SCP-610 infection. It may have been idealistic, perhaps even naive by some standards, but the rest of his team was behind him in the pursuit of that noble goal, although not one of them knew it would soon cost them their lives. Hitting speed bump after speed bump in their research, the team were beginning to lose hope. Researcher David was the most outspoken in how tired he was of seeing the same results, yelling in frustration that the flesh could not be cured by conventional means. However, it was that outburst that gave Russell the idea. They had tried treating SCP-610 like a common virus, as if it was any other form of disease, largely thanks to Dr. Botton's input. And granted, that approach had taught them a lot about the flesh's ability to contaminate a subject from a single cell. But this infection was anomalous through and through. Could the solution to eradicating it for good lie not in a medical cure, but in another SCP? Russell brought this hypothesis to the rest of the research team, and each of them had suggestions for other anomalies they could potentially use to cure a subject of the flesh that hates. "We could get SCP-049 to take a look at the infected patient," Clennon suggested. "Oh, might work," Carpenter mused. "Although even if he cures someone, he might also kill them. He has his whole deal about ridding the world of the pestilence could prove to be a problem." There's always 682, David said dryly. "Have the reptile eat up all the SCP-610 infectees and voila, problem solved." "Oh, real helpful, David," researcher Russell retorted. "And what are we gonna do when SCP-682 adapts to the flesh? You really want an infected immortal lizard on the loose?" "Gentlemen, please," Dr. Botton spoke up. "We're forgetting one obvious option. I propose we submit a joint formal request to use SCP-914 for this experiment." Unanimously, the group all agreed that this was the best course of action. SCP-914, or the Clockworks, was a giant machine with two booths marked Input and Output. Although the Foundation still couldn't fully comprehend exactly how SCP-914 seemed to take any object placed within it and disassemble, recreate, improve, or destroy the item depending on its current setting. There was one issue, however. A prior failed experiment wherein a D-class was placed in SCP-914 had led to some pretty disastrous consequences. As a result, ever since, no organic matter was to be placed within the Clockworks, a rule that the team's experiment with the flesh would breach. Still, they pressed on, each of the 5 researchers signing their request to utilize SCP-914 before it was submitted to the Foundation higher-ups. Within hours, the request was denied, but the team was determined that SCP-914 could be the key to solving the Foundation's long-standing issue with SCP-610. Dr. Carpenter repealed the decision, urging the higher-ups to reconsider. He argued that this flouting of the no organic matter rule was necessary to potentially rid the world of the flesh that hates. After a few days of consideration, the request was finally, fatefully, granted. The team went to work immediately, requisitioning 2 test subjects, both of which had suffered SCP-610 infections and were horribly mutated. The pair of them were deemed a potential hazard to every member of Foundation staff on site, and as a result, the entire wing of the facility where the Clockworks was housed had to be evacuated for safety. Dressed in biohazard suits to protect themselves, the researchers used an electric cattle prod to coax the first flesh specimen into the input chamber of SCP-914. This was the test run. They wanted to see if the Clockworks would actually be able to affect those infected with SCP-610 at all. Plus, they needed a failsafe just in case something went wrong. And luckily, the machine had just the thing. Russell asked Clennon to set the Clockworks to rough, and with a click and whir of its numerous gears and gyros, SCP-914 came to life. Instantly, the infected test subject was completely obliterated. The setting had reduced it to atoms, disintegrating it on such a microscopic level that there was nothing left in the output chamber. The second infected creature seemed to bristle with anger, but didn't attack or become aggressive, as it too was prodded towards the Clockworks. Next, perhaps out of fear that their theory might be wrong, The team agreed to set SCP-914 to its 1-to-1 setting. Sure enough, the machine recreated another instance of a specimen infected with the flesh that hates, replacing the previous one. "We all know we're stalling," researcher David piped up. "Let's do what we came here for. Set the clockworks to course." Nervously receiving a nod from Dr. Carpenter, Clennon stepped forward to switch the dial on SCP-914 to the course setting. This was the primary reason the team had all agreed to use the machine on a flesh specimen. This setting could disassemble any item placed in the input booth, separating it into its base components. Botten had suggested the use of SCP-914 based on the theory that, if it worked correctly, the clockworks could extract the flesh that hates from its infected host, rendering them free of the disease. The machine made a colossal amount of noise as Clennon hurried back to a safe distance with the others. But as it was powering up, seconds from activating, Dr. Carpenter noticed something. The color drained from his face as he saw it. None of the others had noticed from a distance that the dial hadn't been set to coarse. Instead, it pointed to very fine, the highest refinement setting 914 had. "What the hell have you done?" Carpenter yelled at Clennon before the machine suddenly activated. What stepped free from the output booth stunned the researcher. It was a man, a seemingly ordinary human, who had presumably been infected by SCP-610 some time ago. He stepped nervously out of the machine, looking confused for a moment as a pair of Foundation security guards cautiously approached him. "We did it," Russell said in awe. Suddenly, fleshy tendrils burst forth from the man's arms, latching on to the approaching guards. They screamed in agony, their bodies melting become a bloody, misshapen mass that stayed attached to the humanoid creature at the center. It was like they became a part of it, the guards' arms and legs forming additional limbs as their forms were reconstituted and repurposed as part of a monster that was now crawling on its 6 legs towards the research team. In a blind panic, the group scrambled for the entrance, the head of the infected man splitting open down the middle, opening up into a wide, snapping pair of jaws. Panting hard as he ran, his breath fogging up the clear faceplate of the biohazard suit, Russell ran through the door, hearing someone close behind. He stopped for a moment, looking back to see the creature on the other side of the door, starting to spill through the doorframe like a liquid. Running faster around a corner, Russell came to another halt in the common area. A third security guard following just before a thick steel security door came slamming down, sealing the creature on the other side. "The other door didn't hold it! What good is that going to do?" Researcher David yelled. "More to the point," Dr. Carpenter said, turning and marching towards Clennon. He launched a furious punch at the assistant, knocking him to the floor. "Why did you set 914 to very fine, Clennon?" the enraged doctor shouted. "You're the one who unleashed that abomination, you maniac!" "What?" Clennon replied, fearfully trembling. I didn't. I swear I didn't. It said course. I'm sure of it." "You expect us to believe that was a mistake?" "Gentlemen, we need to focus on the situation at hand," the security officer interjected. "Regardless of who's responsible, we need to inform the Foundation higher-ups." "There's an emergency lockdown," Russell replied. "It would have triggered the moment the SCP-610 specimen got free." "You've trapped us with a monster, Clennon," Dr. Carpenter spat. "Hold on," researcher David spoke up. "Wasn't it Botton's idea to use 914 in the first place?" The common area fell silent as everyone turned to look at Dr. Botten. "Did you plan for this, Doc?" David pushed. Botten chuckled. "Need I remind you, my friends, that we all agreed to use the clockworks, did we not? All of our names are on the request," he answered. "Besides, accusing me, David, that's rather rich coming from you." "What's that supposed to mean?" the researcher fired back. Beckoning his finger, Botten encouraged the rest of the team to follow him across the common area to where a row of lockers stood, each door bearing one of their names. He gestured to the one labeled David. "Go on," Botten added. Shooting him a dirty look, David barged past the disease expert and opened his locker. Not one among the group expected what would fall out. It was an old leather-bound book, symbols carved into the front cover. Instantly, thanks to the work studying SCP-610, the researchers all knew a text on Sarkicism when they saw one. It had been long known that the flesh that hates was often described in texts revered by Sarkic cults, who worship death, decay, and disease. "What the hell, David?" Russell exclaimed, picking up the book and examining it in disbelief. "You're a Sarkist?" Carpenter asked, the fury in his voice already elevating. "No, I'm not!" Researcher David protested. I've never seen that before!" "It was in your locker," the doctor yelled. "You're one of those cannibal cultists! This was your plan!
to refine the flesh for your twisted, death-worshipping religion. It certainly seems that way, Botan interjected. After all, Researcher David did seem frustrated at our earlier results. Impatient, even. You, David pointed at the doctor. You planted this in my locker! You're here a sarcist, Clennon repeated in a nervous stammer. You made me turn the dial to very fine. You made that thing appear. You made me your accomplice! Anger tears streamed down his face. Clennon's hand reached for the security officer's gun and went to draw it, planning to shoot David on the spot. But as he went to pull the weapon from the guard's holster, it wouldn't budge. It was then that Assistant Clennon stared in horror at his hand. His fingers had fused to the guard's leg. The officer gave a twisted grin as his torso burst open, tendrils of flesh latching onto Clennon and assimilating him. Just like it had done before, the flesh creature broke down its victim's body, making it a new part of itself, a grotesque mass of limbs and bloody matter, littered with the discarded faces of those it had infected. The research team looked at it terrified, their stomachs turning, disgusted at the growing, growling abomination of bodies fused to one another. Oh, you're beautiful, Russell heard a voice whisper behind him. He turned to see Botan, looking at the SCP-610 creature and smiling. Researcher David was the closest, and the creature lunged at him, pulling his leg out from under him. Screaming in fear, the researcher fell onto the ground and was dragged towards the flesh. It pulled him in, his body stretching, skin tearing and bones snapping as he became part of it. A new set of limbs added to the monster. Dr. Carpenter went to try and pull him free, but it was already too late. But he stepped back, knowing that if he touched it, he would be infected too. The sound of running caught Russell's attention, and he spotted Botan making a break for it. Grabbing Dr. Carpenter by the sleeve, the researcher pulled him in the same direction, partly running away from the flesh as it assimilated David, and partly chasing the Sarkic saboteur. The pair of them quickly caught up to Botan, leaning over himself and panting breathlessly. Thank God you two made it, he wheezed after the run. I can't believe David could do this, to unleash this nightmare upon us. Russell thought to snap at him, to scream how dare he keep lying, but Botan's back was to him now. He'd never get a better chance. There was a cabinet on the corridor wall containing a fire axe for emergencies. As carefully and quietly as he could, Russell fished the axe out of its case whilst Botan and Carpenter were looking away. We should get the Foundation to lift the lockdown, Botan was saying. They need to let us out and then— Oh! Oh! He let out a blood-curdling scream mid-sentence as the axe blade wounded him. Russell pulled it back, standing over the doctor as he fell to the floor in agony. Russell, have you lost your mind? Carpenter exclaimed. No, Doctor. He's the cultist. I have no idea how he tricked Clennon, but that flesh creature exists because of him, the researcher answered. From the floor, unable to move thanks to his injury, Dr. Botan began to laugh. It took me years to infiltrate the Foundation. So much time waiting to gain access to that blessed flesh, he gloated. And now you've helped me to refine it, to create its ultimate form. You want to kill me? Go ahead, Russell. My life doesn't matter. For once that creature is free, it will bring about a new age of flesh, and Grand Karcist Iron will reward me for the role I played in unleashing it. David was right, Carpenter realized. Botan, you've planted that book on him to throw us off. Doctor, we need to think of something, Researcher Russell interjected, axe still in hand. Nobody knows more about the flesh that hates than us. There must be a way to kill that thing. Otherwise, if it gets out of this lockdown, it could spread to everyone in the Foundation. What about fire? That's been effective against 610 infectees before, right? Yes, but the doctor desperately tried to think. This new being we've created, he created, Russell argued, looking at the grimacing, wounded Botan. We cannot deny the role we've all played in this, researcher, Carpenter argued. And we have no idea if it possesses the same weaknesses as the flesh before its refinement. But we have to try, sir, the researcher protested. Of course, I agree. The sickening sound of a slithering, slick mass was rapidly approaching. Still laying on the floor in pain, Dr. Botan had been dragged to the middle of a junction, with Carpenter and Russell hiding around either corner. Suddenly, Botan started hollering as the flesh came into view, practically calling it to him. Oh, look at you! He exclaimed. You're better than I could have ever hoped for! Looking down at him with the faces it had collected, the creature stabbed one of its disgusting appendages through Botan, drawing its body into its growing form. I am honored to give my life so that the age of flesh may begin, the doctor said weakly, through the pain as he was infected. From around the corner,
Carpenter had taken the Sarkic text and set its pages on fire with a cigarette lighter. Turning to the creature, he hurled the mass of burning paper at it, hoping it would be enough fire to spread to the flesh while it was assimilating Botan, who they had left there as bait. The fiery book collided with the monstrosity. As Russell peeked around the corner, he saw the flesh retreating from the flames, Botan's body now added to it. For a moment, it seemed like the creature was afraid of the fire, but slowly it drew nearer and nearer to the book. With ease, it stamped down the flames with Botan's leg, dousing the fire and suffering no damage to it at all. Gripping the axe in his hands, Russell went to charge at the creature, only to feel something push him back. Dr. Carpenter had stopped him. "Run!" he yelled. Instantly, Russell turned and raced down the corridor, the sound of fleshy tentacles whipping through the air. He dared not look back, just in case the monster was right behind him. Eventually, he reached another corner and slammed his back against it, hands shuddering as he held on to the fire axe. He had no idea what had happened to Carpenter. Maybe it got him, or perhaps he had managed to give it the slip at the last second. "Russell!" came a hushed voice from around the corner, one the researcher recognized. He turned to see Dr. Carpenter approaching him, sneaking like he was trying to avoid being heard. "I think I've managed to give it the slip," the doctor whispered. For a second, Russell backed up, his hands tightening around the axe handle. This might have looked like Dr. Carpenter, but was it? "Are you really you, Doctor?" he asked. "Of course I am," Carpenter replied. "You don't think that I'm not that monstrosity?" Russell raised the axe defensively, only to notice the sadness in the doctor's face. Unable to bring himself to swing, even to find out, the researcher lowered his weapon. Carpenter looked grateful. "Come on, let's get them to lift this lockdown," he said. "I'm sure an MTF can step in and take care of our mistake." As the pair of them cautiously made their way towards one of the locked doors, Dr. Carpenter reached out a hand to place it on Russell's shoulder. Ever since she was in high school, Faith had dreamed of moving out and finally getting a place of her own. It wasn't that she didn't love her parents. She did, but they were always around, always coming into her room without knocking, telling her when to go to bed, when to wake up, not to eat dinner in front of the TV. In college, she had some welcome independence, but she had to live with roommates. Again, they were perfectly nice people. Some of them she even considered good friends, but she hated having to share her space, having to come home from a long day of classes and see someone else's dishes piled up in the sink, to have someone else's music keeping her awake at night, to delay her morning shower because someone else had gotten there first. So she was thrilled when a few years after graduating, she got a new job at a marketing company that would finally let her afford a place by herself. At last, she could have some peace, some quiet, and most importantly, some privacy. Faith spent all day moving furniture and unpacking boxes, turning the little apartment into a real home. It wasn't much, just a main room she used as a bedroom and living room, a bathroom, and a basic little kitchen. But it was all hers. And all of the little personal touches she'd put together really made it feel like the place was meant for her. There was the orange couch she'd picked up at a vintage store downtown, the coffee table she'd gotten for free from her last roommate, framed pictures of her family and friends, a bed with linens in her favorite color, light blue, and lots of potted plants. Over time, she would find even more things, more little personal touches to liven up the space. Now, how to celebrate her new home? Her gas wasn't on yet, so she couldn't cook anything, but that was the perfect excuse to order in. 30 minutes or less later, she was kicking back on her couch with a large cheese pizza, watching a scary movie on her TV. No one would ask to switch it over to The Bachelor. No one would take the last slice while she was in the bathroom. It was perfect. Finally, a little piece of heaven, an introvert's paradise. As she finished her first meal in the new place, she felt her eyes beginning to grow heavy, the day of strenuous unpacking catching up with her body. Just as she was thinking about calling it a night, a pale-faced monster appeared out of nowhere on screen, terrifying the movie's main character and making Faith jump, spilling her soda all over the coffee table. "Damn it!" she groaned. Already she'd made a mess, but hey, she tried to look on the bright side. It was yet another first to break in the apartment. She grabbed a kitchen towel to mop up the soda, and when she returned to the main room, she froze. There was something in the window, standing out against the darkness outside. At first, she thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light, but as she slowly approached the window, eyes wide and hands trembling, she got a better look. There, was a face, a little difficult to make out, as if it were peering out of the shadows, but unmistakable nonetheless. It was pale, human, vaguely resembling a strange man with dark circles under his eyes, and he was looking right at her. She didn't scream. She was too terrified to make a sound. She stared at the face for a long moment, waiting for it to do something, anything. After several moments of the tensest staring contest of her life, she blinked. The face didn't budge. You need to leave, she finally spoke, surprising herself as she did. If you don't get out of here, I'm calling the cops. Again, the face did nothing. Do you hear me? Her voice climbed in pitch, her heart pounding against the inside of her chest. Who was he? What did he want? She became vaguely aware of the fact that she couldn't see the rest of the man's body, just his face, looking at her with a neutral expression, a look of vague curiosity, like someone watching a caged animal at the zoo might have. It was then she remembered something that made her blood run cold, made the towel drop from her hands as her stomach sank. She lived on the 3rd floor. Her apartment had no balcony, no fire escape he could have climbed up. Whatever was looking at her through her window, it was no ordinary peeping Tom. She couldn't say how long she stared at the face, its unblinking eyes, its inscrutable expression. She moved closer to the window step by step, until she was almost nose to nose with the thing. She couldn't think of it as a person, though it looked like one. Mostly. She should run screaming out the door, looking for some kind of help, but what would she say? That there was a floating face looking at her through the window? What if it was somehow all in her head? Some sort of hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the stress of the move. She raised a fist and, following a passive instinct, rapped on the glass. She didn't know what she expected, for it to blink, to move, to knock back, to say something, but nothing happened. It just stayed there, as if it were part of the window itself. Faith pulled the curtains closed, hiding the strange face from view. With any luck, it would be gone in the morning. She had worked hard to get this apartment, and she would be damned if she let some strange thing, whatever it was, drive her out of her new home. But as she climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, she could still feel its gaze on her, as if it could see through the thick fabric of the curtains. She rolled over onto her side, her back to the window, and tried her best to forget about it, to shake that horrible feeling of being observed. She lay there for hours, eyes open, heart racing. But finally the exhaustion won, and she slipped away into sleep. She didn't dream at all that night. It was as if she closed her eyes and seconds later, it was morning. She woke to the beep of her alarm, feeling as if she hadn't rested at all. The first thing she did was climb out of the bed and go to the window. Carefully, tentatively, she opened the curtains. She let out a sigh of deep relief. The face was gone. She must have imagined it after all. A bit concerning, but as long as it didn't happen again, she wouldn't have anything to worry about. Lack of sleep does strange things to the mind after all. No longer plagued by the fear of that strange face, Faith hopped into the shower and let the worries of the previous night wash away, disappearing down the drain. She brushed her teeth, dried her hair, did her makeup, and dressed for work. After a banana and a quick cup of coffee, she was out the door. Work was exceptionally busy that day, and it pushed any memory of the oddity in the window out of her mind entirely. She was even feeling good enough to accept her friend's offer to grab a drink after work. They met up at a bar down the street from her new place, sharing cocktails, memories, and a plate of onion rings. It was a perfect, lovely evening. By the time she got home, savoring the click of the key in the lock as she let herself into her quiet little sanctuary, she had completely forgotten about the unusual apparition. She swung the door open and rushed to dump herself onto the couch for a bit of TV before bed. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. The face, back in its previous place, staring at her from the darkness outside. She gasped at the sight, her scream catching in her throat. It was just as she remembered it. Wait, no, something was different. What was it? She clapped her mouth in horror as she identified the change. Its expression was different. Gone was the vaguely interested, neutral expression. Now, it was smiling at her. Not a pleasant smile, not a warm, friendly smile. A wicked smile, twisted and cruel. It knew she was afraid, that she'd been hoping it was gone forever, and it was enjoying itself. Her hands were shaking, nervous sweat beading on her brow. What do you want from me? she whispered, staring into its eyes. They didn't move, but they glittered with malicious glee just the same. "What do you want from me?" she repeated, her voice rising to a shout. "Shut up!" her next-door neighbor yelled, banging on the wall. "It's after midnight!" She couldn't bring herself to respond. She had more important things to attend to. Her stomach turned, bile rising in her throat. Would the face be gone again in the morning? Would it come back again at night? Was the apartment haunted, possessed by a specter doomed to reside in her window forever? Was that why the rent had been so affordable? Or maybe it was her. Maybe this thing had been drawn to her. Or maybe she was losing her mind, unaccustomed to living alone, and her sanity was slipping away. She shivered at the thought. What was worse, if the face was all in her head, or if it wasn't? Rather than attempt to answer the question gnawing at her, she closed the curtains. Out of sight, out of mind, she thought. She would have to keep the curtain closed, possibly forever. It was better than seeing that damned face grinning that horrible grin. But as she tried to settle in for another restless night, she could feel its eyes boring into her, burning into her skull. She had never felt so uneasy before. She prepared for cockroaches, for black mold, and for burglars, but not for this. This was something outside of her understanding, outside of reality itself. "Just don't look," she whispered to herself. "Just don't look at it." It became part of her daily routine. Wake up, ignore the window, go to work, try to forget about the window, get home, try desperately not to think about the window. She could always feel it, though. As soon as the sun went down, though, she kept the curtains closed. She knew it was there. She thought about checking to see what face it was making this time, but she couldn't bring herself to look. Gradually, her condition worsened. She woke up to a tightness in her chest, panic attacks that wrecked her body, and felt like her heart might stop beating. Her stomach would ache. She struggled to keep food down. One morning, she rushed to the bathroom and spat up blood. The effect began to follow her out of the apartment, too, far away from the face's dwelling. She would sit at her desk, struggling to focus on marketing campaigns and pitches, and she would feel a sudden pain in her stomach, forcing her to double over and groan with agony. She would see flickers of the pale face in her peripheral vision, turning to look, only to find there was nothing there. When she walked down the hall to the elevator or down the street outside her building, she would feel as if someone was following her. She never saw anyone, never heard any footsteps coming up behind her, but she could never shake off the sensation. Soon, even her formerly dreamless nights of sleep, as fitful as they had been, became unsafe. She would toss and turn, sweating through her sheets, as her subconscious was tormented by chilling visions and terrible nightmares. She would dream of walking down a long, dark hallway that seemed to go on forever, and something coming up behind her, trying to grab her and drag her away. It would chase her, wide dark eyes and long, long limbs grasping at her, as she ran and ran but never escaped. Other times she would dream of being locked in a damp basement, chained to a wall as the pale creature sat in a chair across from her, just watching, waiting for something, though she didn't know what. Every night, another nightmare that made her wake up screaming, fighting off invisible attackers. After 2 weeks of living in hell, she decided to look out the window again. She had to see, had to know. That night, when she opened the curtains, it was there, mouth wide open, eyes glinting. It was laughing at her. Screw the deposit, enough was enough. She wanted her home back. She picked up the heavy lamp on her bedside table, wound it up, and threw it out the window with all her might. The glass shattered. Little crystalline shards sprang in every direction as the lamp flew through the air, out the window and down to the street below. And just like that, the face was gone. She checked every other window in place, the little one in the bathroom, the peephole on her door, but it was nowhere to be found. She was free. Her knees gave out and she collapsed to the floor, her face in her hands and wept from sheer relief. Tomorrow she would clean up the broken glass and spin her landlord a story about a freak accident. Someone would come to fix the window, and it would be the best money she had ever spent. Eventually the whole ordeal would fade away from memory like a bad dream, but somewhere out there, someone else was living the nightmare all over again, looking out a darkened window to see an unwelcome guest. The entity known as SCP-965. SCP-965 is a phenomenon affecting framed windows. When it appears, it manifests in the shape of a shadowy face, belonging to a pale man staring in through the window. The details of the man's face vary from person to person. as well as his apparent age and the direction he is facing. However, all reports point to the same figure at various ages, ranging from 10 to 55. The Foundation has attempted to use facial recognition software to identify a citizen matching the description of this figure, but so far, no one has been found. SCP-965 will not appear in just any window. It will only manifest when the lighting on the outside of the window drops below illumination of 5 candelas. The lighting on the inside of the window does not have any measurable effect. The face will only appear in the confines of a completely assembled window frame, though the window does not necessarily need to be installed anywhere. It will only move from one glass pane to another if its original point of manifestation is destroyed. The face can be seen from an outside vantage point, though it has been described by observers as looking away into the room. When SCP-965 first appears to someone, it produces feelings of unease, anxiety, and low-grade paranoia. Anyone within the visual range of the affected window will experience these feelings, even if the window is covered by curtains or any other means. Any individual that sleeps in an area visible to SCP-965's manifestation point will begin to experience difficulty sleeping, suffering from upsetting and disturbing dreams. However, this is not the endpoint of the entity's impact on those it appears to. At a point between 3 and 10 nights of sleep after its initial appearance, the entity's facial expression will begin to shift into a noticeable smile. After this shift, the victim's symptoms will become physical as well as mental, including ulcers and intestinal bleeding, heartburn, abdominal pain, and even vomiting blood. This has been attributed to the entity's influence on the human body's reaction to heightened levels of stress and fear. The subjects that reach this stage of exposure to SCP-965 begin to see its face in windows in their dreams, as well as spotting it in their peripheral vision while going about their waking life. They begin to see the face out of the corner of their eye, even when the affected window is nowhere in sight. These additional sightings are accompanied by lingering feelings of paranoia and the sensation that something is following or watching them. Though the entity has never made a sound and does not move while it is visible, it can disappear and reappear in different poses. It has also displayed notable signs of sentience, appearing disappointed when it manifests in an empty room, and angry if it sees someone who broke its previous window. When presented with one of the agents who first brought it into custody, the entity appeared frightened for the first time. Testing involving SCP-965, involving the destruction of its host window, confirmed that a multi-paned window might act as multiple holding zones, but significant damage to its overall structure keeps it from being a viable replacement. In this particular case, the entity manifested in a nearby experimentation chamber's observation window, which was promptly destroyed in order to prevent any potential breaches. For a month following this incident, the entity manifested with noticeably hostile facial expressions, clearly resentful of its treatment. Only one other notable incident has occurred so far during the course of SCP-965's containment by the SCP Foundation. Dr. L, the rest of her name has been redacted from the official file, was the head researcher assigned to SCP-965 for several months before she filed an official request for transfer to a different test subject. She was beginning to experience intrusive visions of SCP-965 and lingering feelings of paranoia, lasting long after she left the Foundation's site. Her symptoms were consistent with those of someone who had slept in the presence of the entity, though she swore up and down she had never napped or slept at all in the vicinity of the affected window. She was temporarily relieved of her duties and provided with psychological care. So far, no other instances of SCP-965 impacting staff who have not slept in its presence have been reported, but this case set an unsettling precedent. The mental health of anyone assigned to SCP-965 is to be strictly monitored in case it expands its influence again. SCP-965 is contained within a framed, ready-to-install window made up of 6 panes of clear glass or other comparable material at a size of at least 15 centimeters by 30 centimeters. The window must be kept in an environmentally controlled storage facility, capable of withstanding earthquakes and other seismic activity. The window must be inspected at least once a week in order to check the integrity of the material. Additionally, at least 2 identical framed windows must be stored in the same facility, in separate chambers with additional insulation. Any lighting in the containment chamber should be kept at a minimum of 130 candelas at any time personnel are inside, with the exception of research and experimentation. Though SCP-965 is currently contained, the Foundation is unable to control its movement should its current window be destroyed. Therefore, SCP-965 is classified as Euclid. Scopophobia is the fear of being watched or looked at by others. Those suffering from this fear will often avoid windows, terrified of who might be standing on the other side, staring in and keeping track of everything they do. Even those of us without scopophobia might find ourselves feeling a prickle of dread while looking out the window at night, watching for a shadowy figure or a ghastly face pressed to the glass. Most of the time, of course, there is no one there. It's just an overactive imagination, the lingering effect of watching one too many scary movies. But eventually, your luck might just run out. One night when the world falls quiet and you go to close the curtains before you go to sleep, just in case, you might just feel that someone is right there, on the other side of that thin pane of glass, staring at you with wide, unblinking eyes. It won't ever come inside, but it isn't going anywhere. And as long as you are where it can see you, you will never know peace again.
We've covered a lot here on this channel, and what you might have noticed about the nature of our discoveries is that knowledge is best broken down before digested. Which is to say, if you are to learn how to assemble a computer, it may benefit you also to see one taken apart. When you do so, you'll notice in front of you not a computer at all, but a collection of individual parts. It's in understanding these distinctive parts in isolation that helps us shape our awareness of their marriage and how they cooperate with one another to become their collective self. Sure, this may be good in practice, but then tell me, how do we comprehend a whole that is composed of parts unwilling to isolate themselves from the rest? Because, let's face it, not all things, let alone SCPs, can be torn apart for the convenience of our study. No matter the subject we seek to understand, it may choose to resist our deconstruction by one way or another. Landmarks like the Temples of Malta and the Pyramid of Djoser are held together by our respect. Monuments like the Statue of Liberty are held together by copper. The family was held together by Charles Manson. But it's not always the preservation of history or elements of the periodic table or psychopaths that reject humans' wishes to disassemble. Far stronger than forces of nuts and bolts are that of character and loyalty, and SCP-2085 is welded together by exactly that. SCP-2085 is a militant anarchist organization consisting of 6 cybernetically enhanced individuals, A1 through A5 and B, operating under the name Kuroi Usagi Shiden, or more commonly known as the Black Rabbit Company. SCP-2085-A subjects are 5 adult female augmented humans, designated SCP-2085-A-1 through SCP-2085-A-5. Subjects are genetic chimeras, each with an estimated 6 to 10 different gene donors. They are fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, Russian, and English, with additional languages varying by individual. Subjects display an array of genetic and cybernetic enhancements, including genetic splices of Felis catus physiology, that is, having cat-like ears, tails, and hair. These tails are prehensile and capable of holding small objects. So if you're accusing one of them of stealing your pen, don't just go searching their pockets. They also have grip pads on hands and feet, in case they ever did decide to retire from anarchy and take up surfing. Their impressive features don't stop there. If they haven't already put James Bond's gadgets to shame yet, just wait. Daniel Craig is about to look like Dora the Explorer. SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5 all have ocular implants with thermal vision, heads-up display, and recording functionality. Also noted are carbon nanoweave muscle fiber augmentation, reinforced endoskeleton, and brain-computer interface with internal hard drive. The list goes on, each etc. more elaborate than the next. Yet what stands out most about them is not a weapon, but an attitude. These 6 members, although now held in isolation from one another, do not show any signs of splitting up, not even when under the heavy pressure of the Foundation's interrogation. Agents spend their hours looking for cracks to dig their fingers into, trying to get one to betray the other and reveal sensitive information. But when asked to spill the beans, SCP-2085 screws the lid on tighter. They remain, as a whole, resistant to our deconstruction. The agents get nowhere with their investigation, and with each minute wasted, it's another victory for SCP-2085. The hours go on and they keep stacking up W's, building momentum day after day, growing stronger and stronger as a unit. As the Foundation tries to tear the group apart, they respond with even greater resistance. And this style of resistance is unique to each member. Imagine you are confronting SCP-2085-A-2. She is talkative, and so you think you might get somewhere. You are all ears. But what SCP-2085-A-2 sees isn't ears, but troughs, and she is happy to feed you her slop. She talks, and you listen closer and closer, but all you are getting is misinformation, false names, inaccurate stories, dates that don't add up. You focus and follow along, only to find yourself having run a marathon all the way to a dead end. Now you are faced with SCP-2085-A-5, who takes a different, more nonsensical approach. You are happy to no longer have to sit through inaccuracies to decipher truths, but now there are no truths at all. All that you are given are absurdities. She speaks in a way that makes you scratch your head, once saying for no apparent reason, "I take a hammer and I break my legs. I break 'em for the better." After so many scratches, you swear you've dug an inch into your skin. And so you move on to SCP-2085-A-4 hoping for better luck. She is straightforward with you, that much you like, but she's hostile and doesn't cooperate. When you ask her name, she raises her middle finger. She tucks it back in to create a fist, and then that fist punches the divider between you. No amount of reinforced glass could make you feel safe at that moment. Cracks spread. It looks like a web spun by a spider, and you feel as small as one. Thankfully, a protective shutter is lowered. Aerosol sedatives are pumped into the containment unit. She continues to try to escape, yelling profanities even harsh for someone locked behind bars. Your ears have taken a beating from curse words, nonsensical rambles, and heaps of misinformation. You want to lower your head into a toilet bowl and hear nothing but water. Yes, that is where these women have driven you. Your head to the bottom of a toilet bowl. You have put in so many hours, and yet you have learned nothing new. And if you can't learn anything new, you might have to rely more on what you already know. But what do you know? Well, you know this. Their track record is quite impressive. Verified operations include smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, kidnapping, extortion, property damage, possession of fissile materials, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, possession, transport, and sale of anomalous items, and, of course, tax evasion. Yet, when grilled under the heat of investigation, they do not reveal any details about the nature of these operations. You just know that they happened. All that is told is that SCP-2085 navigates in such a way as to minimize the chance of civilian casualties and maximize material and morale damage to their target. They are proud of this. It seems as if SCP-2085 perceives themselves on the side of good. While their list of operations on paper look like crimes, they stand proudly behind them, pleading guilty with a grin. But behind every smile is more teeth. Teeth that go beyond saying cheese. Teeth hiding in the dark caves of a sealed mouth. And you are determined to play dentist and find your way in. But SCP-2085 doesn't say "ah" for just anyone. So how are you to understand a group that resists our preferred methods of learning? How are you to properly assess the pieces of a puzzle when the puzzle is glued tightly together? It starts at the top. Before you can decipher the motives of a nation, you'd be smart to study their leader. And if you want to extrapolate the schemes of a football team, you'd interview the coach. And to truly know the moral of a television show, you'd be better off asking the creator than the actors. All of this is just to say, if you are to ever understand the complexities of SCP-2085, it is necessary you begin with SCP-2085-B. the person pulling the string of the entire operation for all of these years. Now you might be imagining a man of many muscles, someone able to fight a bear with an arm tied behind his back, someone who kicks through saloon doors, tilts back his liquor, and walks out with a woman in each arm, or a catgirl. But you'd be dead wrong. SCP-2085-B, also known as Wizard, does not look like an imposing lead at first glance, or even at the 100th glance. He is generally in very poor health, and his face shows it. He suffers from a variety of illnesses, most notably a vitamin D deficiency, acute radiation syndrome, and has unmanageable scarring from severe and repeated skin ulceration. He doesn't wear a cape and glamorous spandex often found hanging in superheroes' closets, but instead he wears an advanced crew escape suit, accompanied by a cheap bathrobe and flimsy red felt wizard's hat. He looks, with no elegant way of putting it, like a dork, a goofball, a doofus. You get the point. Furthermore, he is an adult male human with certain cybernetic and genetic enhancements. He has an adaptation of the gastrointestinal tract to allow for an all-liquid diet. Within his suit, an esophageal input port and waste output port are integrated. It is equipped with modifications to regulate sweat, reduce abrasion damage from extended usage, and aid in skin regeneration. His genetic enhancements include the replacement of 11 previously missing digits on hands and feet, and also has an internal drug pump, typically used for painkillers. Because, as we are about to learn, SCP-2085-B is most often on the wrong end of pain. Notice these modifications are not those you would find in a science fiction novel, but more likely behind the trench coat of a suspicious man in a dark alley. And we all know nothing good is ever concealed behind a trench coat. But have you ever wondered if that truth also extends to robes? Because when we pull open SCP-2085's, what we find is truly terrifying. SCP-2085-1. SCP-2085-1 is a fibrous mass of self-replicating carbon nanomaterials within SCP-2085-B's chest cavity, with growths protruding into the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, spinal cord, and left lung. The growth of the SCP-2085-1 and its consumption of SCP-2085-B's body tissues has been impeded through the addition of various containment implants used to sever communication between growth sections and control nodes, and counter the replication process. SCP-2085-1's rate of replication without the influence of these containment implants is unknown. SCP-2085-1's periods of activity occur on average once every 3 months. The process lasts for up to 15 minutes and causes SCP-2085-B intense pain. Imagine a heart attack. Imagine Mike Tyson using your sternum like a punching bag. Imagine a cactus strapped to your front. This is the pain and torture SCP-2085 wears daily. There is no S logo printed on his chest like Superman. No symmetrically slick symbol like Batman. Instead, just cancerous growth. Kryptonite worn like a tie. The knot never to be loosened. But to SCP-2085-B, this anomaly is not just a number to be studied, but more so a being to be understood. It is more personal than a medical condition. It is something that he wakes up with each and every day. He calls it Red. At first, the Foundation saw SCP-2085's close connection with Red to be childish and silly, as if a small boy who names his freckles out of boredom and loneliness. But as you are about to see, how they met was more memorable than first finding a freckle in the mirror. A meteor struck down, and SCP-2085-B was the only person at the scene. Red was inside. As Wizard approached the meteor, Red leapt onto him and buried a home into his chest cavity. Far from a freckle on the skin, Red is a cancer. It grows and grows, leaching to what it can. It can't be removed with surgery. It can't be covered by a band-aid. It has no empathy or mercy. It leeches on and eats away at its host. But it's more than pain that it causes. Falling off a swing set and bursting open your leg hurts, sure, but at least both you and your injury are on the same team. Cuts try to heal. When left alone, injuries make effort to find homeostasis. But Red is a different breed. It hates us in a way that injuries are incapable of doing. It has a deep disdain for humanity. It tears Wizard down, reveling in his degradation. Its sole purpose is to eat him whole. Wizard can only take this personally, as he doesn't just feel the universally understood sensation of pain, but also the unique passion of its purpose. SCP-2085-B's adventures with Red seem to be where our story begins, and what ultimately keeps it moving. In fact, it was while SCP-2085-B was running around trying to fix his chest with implants when he eventually met who we refer to as SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5. He was at the clinic to get some new parts, and when he was going through the installation process, there was an explosion. One of the 5 girls barged out of a building, guns blazing. He started running alongside them with his chest half open. The woman embraced him immediately and reciprocated. Knowing nothing of the situation, he instinctively knew to take their side. There were bullets coming from both directions, but he intuitively understood which side was good and which side was bad. A distinction SCP-2085 believes the world needs help clarifying. But it is hard to see a reason for a war when our eyes are focused on the casualties. Beliefs are less clear when tucked behind bullets. The sounds of gunfire muffle their message. Morality, while a complex subject, SCP-2085 believes is simplified by the masses. Events are deemed good or bad based on the term used for them in a court of law. When we see the words smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, and, of course, tax evasion, it is our impulse to label those as morally bad. But SCP-2085 desperately wants you to look beyond the language. They want the words to dissipate off the paper, letter by letter, until all you have is a blank page. Now look at the pencil and the hand that holds it. Watch how it moves. That is what matters. Whether it draws weapons or mermaids is irrelevant. Both can be used for good. Both can be used for evil. Intent is everything, and SCP-2085 intends on making the world a better place, or so they like to claim, but maybe there is more to it. After SCP-2085-B and the 5 women escaped the gunfire, they went on to steal a boat and hightail it out of Japan. They spent their nights out there on the ocean, stargazing and stuffing themselves with instant ramen and cheap beer. And surprisingly, between all the crazy adventures SCP-2085-B had been on, this is what Wizard spoke about most: the time spent on the boat out at sea. For the first time in ages, he was finally somewhere where he was happy. It was this moment that actually meant the most to him. It wasn't the children they apparently saved from imperialism. It wasn't the wealth they apparently redistributed to the poor. It wasn't any good deed at all. It was the selfish, almost shallow sensation of being happy on a boat. This singular moment meant so much to SCP-2085-B. He reflected on it as if it were a wedding day or a memorable vacation, which makes you wonder. SCP-2085 has been investigated and interrogated, and all that they preach is that they are doing the world a favor with their antics. Their tales are captivating, sure, but is it actually storytelling, or is it just virtue signaling? There is an emotional depth to SCP-2085 unique to any other militant anarchist group. While they are genetically designed to most efficiently complete missions, they are not all robots fixed on the high of task completion. Each and every one of them wants more. They want a group. They want a group not just to have the numbers to overthrow a government, but to have the numbers to fill a room, or boat, with companionship. When they refuse to cooperate with you and leak information about their operation, maybe what you are witnessing isn't the strength of their loyalty, but also the weakness of their codependence. And so you decide this is the new angle you're going to take with your interrogation. You enter the room with a new focus. You feel like an earthquake, eager to make cracks in their core. You isolate SCP-2085-A-4. You are met expectantly with hostility. You fight back with psychology. You cross your legs and put on your glasses as if to say, "Let's talk about that anger." Where does it stem from? She strengthens her emotional guard, but you keep prying. You say that it sounds like she is lonely. You say it sounds like her loyalty doesn't come from good character, but rather insecurity and self-doubt. You ask her if completing missions with her crew was actually a way to improve the world, or was it just an elaborate way to build a close friend group, bound together by common goals? Did new missions sprout from necessity, or were they fabricated by fears of being alone with nothing to do? Were end of operation high fives to celebrate good overcoming evil, or were they just excuses to feel the touch of another human, skin to skin? You stop there and let silence do the rest. SCP-2085-A-4 sits with her thoughts. She is ready to break, and finally, she does. She says she's willing to provide video logs of the group's former operations. She's ready to cooperate. She's ready to abandon loyalty to groupthink and focus instead on self-improvement. In exchange, she kindly asks that she be reciprocated and that the sanction placed on her be lifted. You come to an agreement, and with that, you feel like your work is done. But is it? You're feeling cocky and accomplished. You forward the video logs to an isolated network for D-Class personnel to review, and you sit back and enjoy a celebratory drink. You have infiltrated and broken the mind of a genetically modified radical designed for anarchy. You give yourself a pat on the back, and you're feeling so great that the pat might even turn into a massage. But before you can indulge in that deep tissue level of self-admiration, the phone rings. Can it be a call from the president telling you that you're the greatest investigator of all time? Can it be that they need you to pose in front of a world-renowned artist so they can erect a statue of you in the center of town square? But the panic on the other side of the phone halts your daydream. Your stomach drops, as if a sudden plummet from a perfectly vertical roller coaster. You have fallen into a trap. The video log at the center of your negotiation was not all it was promised to be. The file, titled backup.avi, consisted of a 2-hour-long video of a feces-filled toilet, presumably recorded from SCP-2085-A's point of view, accompanied by an audio loop of the folk song Koro Beniki, as performed by the Red Army Choir. Its absurdity feels like an art project, like a short film you are assigned to watch in a community college class. But instead of putting you to sleep, it does a whole lot more. The contained audiovisual cognitohazard induced anaphylaxis and exudative diarrhea in the observing D-Class subject. The D-Class subject died 4 minutes after initial access of the file from blood loss and oxygen deprivation. SCP-2085-A-4 sits in containment, laughing, while you sit there on your couch, dethroned, back where you started, having thought you tore SCP-2085 apart with your mind, only to learn that your efforts only reinforced it with more glue.
What was that? A face? Just as quickly as I'd glimpsed it, it was gone. It was cold as death and twice as dark in here. Seriously, I'd never been anywhere so dark. It was more than just the absence of light. It was like walking through thick black water, only able to see inches in front of my face. Things moved slower than they should have. Every step I took further down towards some unknowable destination, the darker and colder it got. I found myself wondering, is this what dying feels like? Slipping down further into nothingness, step by step through darkness that never ends? It was a stairway, like Jacob's ladder, except instead of up to heaven, it was a one-way trip straight down. There was some distant, tinny whirring noise that I couldn't quite make out, the way things sound when you're drowning. I didn't know what possibility was scarier, that the steps just went on forever and I'd be walking until my bones turned to dust, or that something would be at the bottom, waiting for me in the dark. The deeper I got, the more I got this sense that the latter was true. The way you can feel yourself being watched or sense someone standing behind you. That evolutionary holdover from when humans still took part in the world of predators and prey, and we were not the predators. Some part of us is just built to know when true danger is lurking nearby, or down below, patient and hungry. I could feel its malice rising up the stairs towards me, the way people in a skyscraper catching fire can feel the heat coming up from below, and know it's already too late for them. For the first time, my eyes came into focus, and I made something out in the distance. When I realized what it was, and worse, how strikingly familiar it was, all I could do was scream. That's when I woke up, drenched in sweat and relieved to see the darkness of the stairway replaced by bright morning lights shining in through my bedroom window. My brother Steve was standing there with a concerned look on his face. He told me I'd been screaming in my sleep and asked me if I'd been having that dream again. It made me feel like an idiot, but I had to nod and tell him, yes, it was the same one. This weird nightmare I've been having day after day, and despite it almost always being the same thing, it somehow never got any less frightening. There was no way to even describe the profound sense of dread I felt walking down those stairs and finally seeing what was waiting for me below, even though I could never actually remember what it was upon waking. Steve told me not to worry about it and tossed some clothes onto my bed. He assured me that it was probably just final stress, seeing as we were a mere few months from graduating. I needed to be up and at 'em today. We were touring one of our first choice colleges. My brother and I had always been close. Even if we hadn't been fraternal twins, I think we still would have been best friends. All through elementary, middle, and high school, we were practically joined at the hip. So it only made sense that when we were getting close to graduation, we wanted to go to the same college. We'd be friends to the end, till we were old men on the porch in rocking chairs. It so happened that we were together in the end, just not in the way I'd hoped. The two of us arrived to check out the potential college a few hours later. It was a nice day out. The brightness of the sky and the lush greenery across campus quickly banished the bitter memories of that bad dream. High school hadn't exactly been a picnic for me. I'm the nervous type, if you couldn't already tell. Steve, who was the more outgoing and confident one, always looked out for me. He'd always been there whenever I was dealing with bullies or academic stress. But at college, I felt like I could reinvent myself and become the kind of person I'd always wanted to be. As we hopped from building to building across the tour, checking out the different facilities and attending a few sample lectures and seminars, I was only becoming more confident that college would be the place for me to finally bloom. It was perfect for me. But despite this college being exactly what I'd wanted in terms of lifestyle and academic pursuits, there was a certain stain on its reputation. If any university is around long enough, or any building at all for that matter, weird incidents are bound to accumulate. Some places have ghost or cryptid sightings. This college had disappearances, not just one or two. 6 different students and 1 janitor had disappeared from the campus. The people had nothing in common except for the fact that they frequented the college. Ages, races, genders, and majors varied across all the missing people, and none of them had known each other. No notes were given, no clues discovered, no remains ever found. A number of the cases are even still open today. It's a frightening thought that people can just drop off the face of the earth like that and never be found. There are over 500,000 missing person cases in the United States back in 2020 alone. It's more common than you think. Still, I comforted myself with the knowledge that thousands of new students came in and out of the college every year, and only a handful of disappearances. What were the chances that something bad would ever happen to me? Though, to be fair, every person who actually did disappear in their last moments thought, what are the chances something like this would happen to me too? We were several hours into the tour when the coffee Steve had on the way over finally caught up with him. He needed to go. Bad. So he asked our tour guide whether there was a bathroom anywhere around here. She told him that he could find one pretty easily on the ground floor of any administrative building nearby. In the meantime, we'd be making our way over to Lecture Hall 2B, so he could simply catch up with us there once he was done. Steve left, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was too wrapped up in the tour. It was only half an hour later, when we were finishing up and preparing to leave Lecture Hall 2B, that his absence from the group suddenly became a lot more noticeable. I started feeling nervous. He'd just gone to the bathroom. What could be taking so long? I ran through all the more rational explanations in my head. Maybe there was a long line. Maybe the bathroom was out of order when he got there and he needed to find another one. Maybe he got a little lost on the way there. Maybe he got a little lost on the way back. There were so many perfectly rational reasons he wasn't with us right now. But as the minutes dragged on, each one felt a little less likely, and a dark pit of dread began to form in my stomach. It wasn't long before I alerted the tour guide. Naturally, she tried to calm me down, saying how likely it is that he'd just gotten lost. Steve was a smart kid. He was thinking of going to this college after all, so he must be smart. There was a smattering of laughter from the tour group. Still, she put the word out to her fellow staff members, and the search began. Despite trying my best to avoid panicking, the stats about all those disappearances just kept flashing through my mind. What if we were the unlucky ones? What if Steve had actually disappeared just like the others and I'd never see him again? As the hours marched on and he still wasn't found, that was all I could think about. I didn't want to lose him. I tried calling his cell phone and texting him countless times but got no response. You can only imagine my relief when I suddenly got a call from him.
though when I heard the content of the call, that relief quickly disappeared. The reception was patchy, and his voice had a strange echo to it, like he was somewhere deep and cavernous. There was this other noise in the background too, this strange tinny whine that felt oddly familiar. I only caught a few words from him before the call cut out. "The door! Stay away! It keeps going! Something down here! Don't come looking! Oh God!" If I was scared before, I was utterly mortified now. I couldn't just leave my brother in a situation like this, no matter what he told me to do. I had to find him somehow, I just had to. Nobody else seemed to take it seriously, but I somehow knew he was in the most terrible danger. That's when I decided to head to the one place I believed he would be, the administrative building. It was such an unremarkable little building, hardly the kind of place where you'd expect some terrible secret to be hiding. But dangerous things often hide in plain sight. Things like the door. It was one of those things from Steve's message that had stuck in my head. The door. Call it instinct, call it intuition, call it blind, dumb luck. But when I was standing in front of an average-looking door in that unremarkable administrative building, I knew I was staring at the exact door that my brother had been talking about. It radiated bad vibes. Dark energy was practically humming off of it, but I wouldn't let that stop me. Perhaps I was stupid, going in without help. While it's easy to criticize from the safety of your home, it's worth remembering we do silly things when we're afraid. And I mean, this was my brother we're talking about here. No one in the world was more important to me than him. No one. The second I entered the room beyond the door, something changed. It was like stepping into another world entirely. The air was thick and oppressive. The floor below me and the walls around me were ungodly cold. But most remarkable of all was the dark. Even my phone's flashlight at full power barely made a dent. I don't think I'd ever seen anything so truly impenetrably dark. Outside of a certain nightmare, anyway. That was when I finally realized where I was standing. At the top of the stairs. Those stairs. The stairs that had been haunting my restless sleep. A single winding stairwell down into the void. Every part of me wanted to run and scream and hide, but I couldn't. I knew that if it were me trapped down there, Steve wouldn't have hesitated. He would have charged down there and helped me. Now I had to do the same for him. After all, we all know that in real life there's no such thing as monsters. And how deep could a staircase really go anyway? That question was soon put to the test as I descended down into the pit. I counted 13 steps each time before reaching a small platform. There were strange markings and scratches on the wall the further I descended. Every footstep I took echoed on and on and on. I must have been walking for a solid 15 minutes, traveling impossibly deep, when I finally heard something else. I called out Steve's name, but quickly realized it wasn't him. It was a little girl, weeping, a few hundred feet below. I couldn't tell if she was afraid, in pain, or both, but hearing it put ice in my veins. What the hell was going on down there? Had whoever taken her taken Steve too? What exactly was I dealing with? These were the questions racing through my mind as I got deeper and deeper into the belly of the beast. Time ceased to matter as the flights went on and on beneath me, even descending into deeper, colder darkness. I was literally walking into my own nightmare, but seeing as the only alternative was leaving my brother to die down here, I couldn't do anything else. I was down countless flights of stairs when I finally saw him. He was a distant, pale speck, dithering and afraid. He was a full flight down from me. I was so happy to see him that at first I didn't even notice anything was wrong. But as I got closer, I began to realize that this wasn't the Steve I knew. The dread crept into me, spreading through every cell like a virus. I finally knew why I recognized it. It was the thing from my dreams. The monster whose appearance always brought those terrible nightmares to an end, but what did it mean to see it in real life? It was Steve's face, but it seemed larger and deathly pale. I froze, and as the face drew closer to me, I realized it had no irises, no pupils, no nostrils, and no mouth. It wasn't my brother. It looked like a terrible death-like mask modeled after him. I tried to scream as it appeared right in front of me, just as I had in my dreams, but it was too late. Long, gnarled fingers curled around my torso and crushed my ribs. It was a pain more intense than I thought possible, and soon even my vision went black. As I was dragged down to the darkness below, the last thought on my mind was, "Steve, I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. I couldn't even save myself."
Violent chaos unfolds across the shoreline. Huge fleshy tendrils slither out of the water, grabbing people who try to flee and drag them into the depths, as giant harpoons made of bone whiz across the beach, cutting down unfortunate sunbathers in droves. It is a terrifying massacre, but you'd never in a million years be able to guess its source. On April 10th, 2010, something strange began to happen in the three Portlands. Now, the anomalous extra-dimensional city-state that overlaps with the locations of Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, and the Isle of Portland is no stranger to unusual occurrences. So it took the population a little while to notice that something was happening. But for some unknown reason, sailboats and motorboats were beginning to vanish from the city. The disappearances occurred overnight when there was no one around to witness them, but slowly, the citizens began to notice that their friends and family members were going out in their watercrafts and never returning home. By April 15th, the civilians were becoming noticeably concerned, fearing the worst. On April 16th, their worst fears were confirmed when two local ghosts, Ankar Ahmed and Greg Moore, went for a nighttime stroll along the harbor. They heard a sudden commotion and rushed to the scene of the disturbance. They arrived just in time to see a living individual being dragged into the watery depths by a large, vein-like tendril. Ahmed asked Greg to wait on land while he ventured out into the water to look for the victim. Unfortunately, Ahmed never came back, and Greg took his story to the Three Portlands Police Department. After waiting a few days for the local man-eating clam populace to migrate, the FBI Unusual Incidents Unit mounted a formal investigation. On the morning of April 17th, all of the missing vehicles suddenly reappeared. This left the UIU and the people of the city with even more questions. Where had all the boats gone? Why were they suddenly back? And what had happened to the missing people who had not been returned along with them? On April 19th, UIU agents dove into the harbor to search for any unusual activity, and while they didn't spot anything especially strange, they did discover that there were fewer animals in the harbor than usual. On April 21st, the threat that had been preying on the citizens of Three Portlands actually made itself known. At 11:19 a.m., 17 boats moved away from the docks on their own, drifting up onto shore, though no one could be seen captaining any of them. As the boats lined up, they began to form a wall blocking access to the water. No one could get in or out. Civilians watched in shock as the boats began to warp and change before their eyes, growing thick masses of scales on their surfaces, sprouting harpoon guns that fired bony projectiles, and slashing veiny tendrils at anyone within reach. The citizens began to panic, running in every direction in an attempt to escape the monstrous boats. But they were too slow to evade the attacks, and the boats snatched them off of the shore and yanked them aboard, using their harpoons to impale those who managed to run farther than the tendrils could stretch. As the army of fleshy boats closed in around the shore, a tugboat broke through the surface of the water. Unlike the rest of the boats, it had a noticeable hole in its hull and was missing its wheelhouse. At an unnaturally quick pace, the tugboat began to advance onto land, using its tendrils to drag itself along the shore and into the more populous part of town. It grabbed civilians at random, absorbing their blood into its metallic surface as it went. Suddenly, it spotted Albert Izzat, a noted member of the Church of the Broken God, and began to focus its attack on him. But before the tugboat monster could reach Izzat, a city security golem interfered. Sadly, though the golem put up a valiant fight, the anomaly was able to destroy it by falling onto it again and again until the golem was no longer able to get back up. There are few creatures that would survive having a boat drop itself on top of them repeatedly, and sadly the security golem was not one of them. With the golem out of the way, the boat continued to drag itself through the streets wildly, crashing through the side of a local restaurant where its owner, an entity known as the Gruel, was in the middle of a busy brunch service. At the sight of the invading watercraft, the Gruel set down his pitcher of bottomless mimosas, wiped his hands on his apron, and grabbed his trusty dual-wield swords from underneath the counter. He kept them there in case someone attempted to dine and dash, but he figured they would do just fine against a blood-drinking tugboat. While the Gruel kept the tugboat busy, UIU forces were able to break through the barricade of boats for a brief period of time, allowing more security golems to enter the area, as well as allowing more citizens to escape. Unfortunately, this little victory was short-lived as further unforeseen horrors drudged themselves up from the deep.
The reanimated corpses of various species native to the harbor began to crawl out of the water, surrounding the gruel and allowing the tugboat to escape the fight. As it made its way back to the harbor, every boat it passed attempted to toss bodies onto the tugboat, covering it in fresh blood. Slowly but surely, the damage to the tugboat began to repair itself. Once the boat had regained its strength, it set its sights on a previously untouched cargo ship. An observing UIU officer determined that the boat was somehow attempting to convert the cargo ship to transform it into another one of its fleshy allies. But before the transformation could take place, a cargo crate broke open, spilling over 1,000 hardtack crackers. Suddenly, the tugboat stopped everything that it was doing. It took one tendril and began to count each individual cracker that had spilled out. While the tugboat was distracted with its task, a citizen offered the UIU use of their rare metals cannonball collection in the fight to apprehend the aggressive boat. One particular cannonball, made from electrum, was able to puncture the hull of one of the infected ships, rendering it motionless. They were elated to have found a weapon that worked against these boats. While the tugboat continued to count, the remaining townspeople gathered all of the electrum they could find and began to fight back against the boats. One by one, the boats sank, and all the while the tugboat continued to count. In the meantime, UIU officers managed to free the gruel from his zombie attackers. They presented him with an electrum cannonball, which he proceeded to punch finger holes into and wield like a bowling ball. Then the gruel had a score to settle. No one, whether human, ghost, or tugboat, was going to mess with his brunch. The gruel barreled towards the harbor, grabbed hold of the still distracted tugboat, and punched it hard with his cannonball fist. If the tugboat could breathe, the punch would have knocked the air out of its lungs. The gruel then threw the tugboat out of the water and continued the savage beating before preparing to destroy the battered vehicle once and for all. He lifted it up into the air, jumped up to follow it, and hit it with so much force that the tugboat careened through the air, colliding with a portal that had transported it to the Isle of Portland. Luckily, this portal could only be unlocked via a high-speed impact from a water-based vehicle. Speaking of luck, an SCP Foundation team was returning to the Isle from a failed mission just as the anomalous boat appeared in their reality. The object was knocked unconscious by the impact of its travel and the beating from the gruel, and in its incapacitated state, it was transported to a nearby Foundation site. There it was contained and given the designation of SCP-6426. Due to its anomalous traits, including the consumption of blood, a talent for hypnosis, and a compulsive counting habit, it was also given the nickname the Vampire Boat. SCP-6426 is a Keter-class sapient hostile entity that, in an inactive state, bears the appearance of a harbor tugboat in a constant state of rust and degradation. Any blood or organs containing blood that come into contact with the boat will be absorbed through the metal, causing the degradation to visibly improve as a result. The most effective blood appears to come from humans, cetaceans, and a few specific species of cetaceans. The entity does not only use the absorbed blood to improve its appearance, but is also capable of using it to create organic additions to its body, including the vein-like tendrils spotted in the 3 Portlands, cognitohazardous eyes attached to bending eye stalks, harpoon guns, and cannons capable of firing ammunition made from anomalous species of barnacles. These barnacles are capable of reanimating dead tissue on contact, and SCP-6426 frequently uses them to create instances of SCP-6426-C, masses of reanimated tissue that the boat uses to aid in its attacks or self-defense. SCP-6426 uses its tendrils to grab prey and drag them towards itself, but the tendrils serve an additional purpose as well. Each of the tendrils has a mouth on the tip, similar in structure to that of the North American medicinal leech. When the tendril has made contact with its prey, the mouth will then bite into the spinal column of the creature, causing its brain function to cease as its canines grow long and hollow. Hard scales form on their skin, and their muscle mass and bone density increase. Once they have been transformed in this way, organisms taken by SCP-6426 are designated SCP-6426-A. These instances are used to the entity's advantage, helping it to extract blood from victims at a distance, as well as providing an additional line of defense and offense. In the event that SCP-6426 encounters another watercraft, It is able to use SCP-6426-A to convert the vehicle into an instance of SCP-6426-B. These converted boats are similar to SCP-6426 and are able to function on their own. However, they are unable to produce their own eye stalks or cannons, unable to create SCP-6426-A instances, and do not appear to be as intelligent as their creator. In the early days of its containment, the exact nature of the Anomalies' intelligence was the subject of debate amongst the research staff. However, on one specific occasion, the Foundation was able to establish a line of direct communication with SCP-6426 and conduct the first, and so far the only, interview with the vampiric tugboat. The inciting incident occurred when the arrival of the Foundation's latest hardtack shipment was delayed, leaving the boat with nothing to count and nothing to keep it occupied. Freed from the bounds of counting, it managed to escape and grab hold of several Foundation staff members with its tendrils. After chasing the boat through the site, guards were able to corner it, prompting the boat to absorb the bodies it had taken and use the organic material to produce a siren that emitted the sound of a human voice. It is through this siren that SCP-6426 responded to interview questions, using the voice of one of its victims. Junior researcher Sajad Williamson, in spite of his protests, was selected to conduct the interview. His fellow staff members refused to take no for an answer, and as the newest hire, the unpleasant job fell on his shoulders. Much to everyone's surprise, the anomaly began the conversation rather politely, saying, "I am so sorry. I thought you were those self-righteous lunatics from the church. I apologize profusely for any trouble I may have caused, and I want to point out I fully support your mission. Yes, our first line of defense against the undersea menace. I am more than willing to punch sharks. Salacious, yes, right. How rude of me, yes." Dr. Williamson's first question concerned SCP-6426's apparent intended victim back in 3 Portlands, Albert Izzat. SCP-6426 responded, "Albert? His first name is really Albert." "Well, what other relationship is there to say besides the hunter and the hunted? Admiral Izzat is a ruthless man, known for terrorizing and slaughtering people like me. He was leading a search party of those barbaric notophiles, intending to gut me like a seal." "What do you mean, people like you?" Dr. Williamson inquired. "Free thinkers, of course. People who are unafraid to break from the mold to carve their own path in life instead of following the predetermined route set by that ignorant check valve. The church is built upon a foundation of lies. No one's really a petty officer on this ship. We're all just cabin boys, stumbling around in the dark as we follow the commands of an offhand COB. If you want real power, real freedom, all you have to do is listen for the call of the beast. Open the porthole and he'll squeeze you right through." Dr. Williamson, feeling rather in over his head, attempted to convince one of his colleagues to take over. When he refused, however, Dr. Williamson continued, "Could you explicate your activities within the harbor and how you arrived there?" "Well, after I got the boatswains off my trail, I found a cave to hide in. I was forced to hide in, yes, forced to hide deep in the cave, which turned out to be a tunnel. Surprisingly, the tunnel led to some coastal community where I took refuge, licking my wounds in the safety of the depths as those zealots stalked the surface. I spent my time preparing, gathering the strength necessary to face them once more, until I was ambushed, assaulted within my hideout by a boatswain. I fought for my life as I was forced out into the open and descended upon by a manner of monsters and freaks, all this orchestrated by that scumbag Izzat. I was beaten within an inch of my life before. I'm not quite sure what happened after that. I believe I was knocked unconscious. You'll have to illuminate me on how I came to be in your custody." At this point, the interview began to veer in an odd direction. The boat expressed confusion about the nature of Williamson's questions, specifically how little they related to the subject of sharks and punching them. It was at this point that the site director sought guidance from the Multi-U department. A researcher there informed Williamson about the confusion.
SCP-6426 had mistaken the SCP Foundation for another organization, the Shark Punching Center. Dr. Williamson resumed the interview, prepared to play along and keep the boat comfortable. Unfortunately, Williamson was a terrible liar. Yes, we are the Shark Punching Center. We will determine if you are a suitable candidate to carry out the mission to search, punch, and contain salations. This verbal misstep caused SCP-6426 to become suspicious. After a moment, it pieced together the truth and began to throw itself against the wall in a desperate attempt to escape. It was apprehended by security guards, who impaled it with a naval ram and returned the watercraft to its containment cell. The exact reason for its apparent fear and hatred of the Foundation is currently unknown, and the boat has made no attempt to speak since. Currently, SCP-6426 is kept in a 39-meter by 39-meter by 50-meter containment chamber. Beneath the chamber, there is an artificial lava tube. The tugboat has a naval ram through its hull and engine, holding it in place. This ram is checked daily for signs of degradation, as it is the primary force keeping the anomaly immobile. If the ram is ever removed or damaged somehow, a failsafe system will activate, releasing 100 hardtack crackers and 2 pieces of electrum into the containment chamber. This is intended to keep the tugboat occupied until the naval rod can be replaced. If for some reason the naval rod fails and the boat runs out of hardtack to count, well, there will be nowhere on water or land that we can hide.
Ask anyone that has been through it, and they'll all tell you the same. That moving home is maybe one of the most stressful things that a normal person can ever experience. It's a logistical nightmare right from the start. The moment you talk to a realtor about being interested in selling your current house and buying another, everything goes downhill from there. After that moment, an avalanche of things comes hurtling towards you. Finding a place you like, making an offer, letting people look around your house, waiting for them to make a counteroffer, exchanging contracts, and that's before you even have thought about packing. And as Milo had learned, doing all of that on your own only makes the stress of moving feel all the more potent. But he had finally made it. After a constant back and forth with his realtor, the time had come for him to pack up all of his worldly possessions and relocate to a brand new place to call home. He had felt it was long overdue for him to get a change of scenery, and luckily, just the right place had come onto the market to answer that call. It was a pretty big house, bigger than Milo's previous home, but considerably cheaper. In fact, he thought it had been significantly undervalued. The house had an almost Victorian-era feel to it, all beautifully carved and varnished woodwork and creaky old floorboards, but in more of an elegant, refined sort of way, rather than a creepier one. That's not to say Milo's new place wasn't without its more unsettling elements. Aside from being big, spacious, and easy to imagine as being haunted, the creepiest thing about the house, aside from its frighteningly low price, was the story of what happened to the previous owners. Obviously, you know that legally we have to disclose whether or not anyone died on this property, the realtor had explained, wearing a forced grin as she showed Milo around the house. Hearing that sentence, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Someone died here? He asked in disbelief. No, of course not, sir. The realtor instantly walked back her statement, less in an effort to ease her client's nerves, but more to ensure that she still closed the deal and earned her commission bonus. Then why the hell would you start a sentence like that? Milo asked. We just have to give full disclosure, but I assure you, the previous residents didn't die on the grounds of this house. She gave that fake smile again. It was pretty ineffectual at reassuring him. So, what happened to the last owner? Well, it's a bit of a mystery, to be honest. A local legend, if you like. But hey, that gives the place more flavor, hearing some spooky history, right? Think of what a conversation starter that will be. The realtor ended her sentence with a forced, snorting laugh, but reined it back in when she realized Milo wasn't laughing with her. As far as I know, there used to be an older couple living here, the Shaws. They were apparently very quiet, reclusive, kept to themselves a lot. I'm sure you know the type. Milo couldn't help but notice she shot him a look as she said that part, as if she was silently passing judgment on the fact he was planning on moving in alone. But they used to spend a lot of time tending the garden out front, so their neighbors would see them pretty frequently, which meant they were all okay and no one had any bad mishaps in the house. You know how old folks can be, such a worry when they get to that age. Yeah, totally, Milo interjected, aware the realtor was stalling. He repeated, So, what actually happened to them?
Well, that's the thing, she shrugged. Nobody knows the full story. One day, the neighbors across the street noticed they hadn't seen Mr. and Mrs. Shaw for quite a while, so naturally they came on over here to see if they were in, and the last thing they wanted was to assume everything was hunky-dory here. I mean, hey, better safe than sorry, right? But once they got inside, they couldn't find either of them. Mr. and Mrs. Shaw were just gone, vanished without a trace. Most people on the street thought they had just sold the place, kept it quiet and moved away, retired to somewhere nice and exotic.
Oh, well, that sounds nice, I suppose, Milo replied, relieved to hear that there hadn't been any brutal unsolved murders in the house, and that it most likely wasn't haunted.
That's just what the neighbors think anyway,
The realtor continued.
Of course, they hadn't sold the house, they'd just left it. When my firm came in to repossess the place, it had all their belongings in it. Some might even still be laying around here. Anyway, did you want to have a look at that contract?
Well, strictly speaking, Milo was the only human living in his new house. He was never fully alone. He had arrived with his two closest friends, a pair of pets he had adopted while living in his old house. One was a hamster by the name of Donut, named after his round little body, and the golden brown shade of his fur had reminded Milo of the glazed sugary baked treat. The other was Pixel, a bearded dragon with a pattern on his scales that resembled some kind of mosaic art. The first order of business, Milo had decided, was before even unpacking, he needed to make sure his scaly and furry friends each had a suitable place to stay and that he got them fed. Little did he realize, there was something else living in the house with them. Something that was far bigger and was getting much hungrier than either of his pets would. Looking around the house, Milo stumbled across a few boxes that he hadn't brought with him. Like the realtor had said, the Shaws still had some of their possessions left lying around the place. Most of it was useless to Milo. Old man's clothes or a set of knitting needles and rolls of colorful thread. It was those particular clues that seemed to imply Mrs. Shaw had a lot of free time on her hands and maybe took up knitting as a hobby during retirement. Of course, the bigger clue was the huge handmade blanket that Milo found draped over some of the remaining boxes in the attic. He wasn't exactly well versed in knitwear, but he could appreciate the craft behind this soft blanket. It clearly had a lot of time and effort put into making it, painstakingly knitting each and every individual thread, looping it around a pair of steel needles, and eventually, after hours of wearing out shaking, bony fingers, produce something that actually looked quite nice. Even though the idea of sitting and knitting a blanket might have been one of the most boring uses of time Milo could imagine, he still had to admit he was surprised that the Shaws had left this particular piece of bedding behind. It seemed like it would be pretty comfy to sleep under. It might help keep a person warm at night now that the colder seasons were approaching. What's more was that the blanket was clean, almost like it had been freshly washed. There was no old person smell on it, no dirt or discoloration, not a stain. And it hadn't even accumulated any dust in its fibers. In fact, he noticed that there was hardly any dust at all up in the attic, despite the house being empty for so long. He assumed the realtors had hired someone as a caretaker while they found a buyer for the place, and they had kept the place clean. After all, what other conclusion could they have possibly drawn? It's not as if something had eaten all the dust. That would be absurd. He'd have a sort through of the Shaw's leftovers later, maybe sell some of it off at a local yard sale or give it to a thrift store. But that blanket might come in handy when it started snowing, so Milo had half a mind to keep it. Now, part of what makes moving home such a stressful life experience isn't just all the logistical and administrative parts of the process. It's only made worse by the fact that it takes forever to move into a new house fully. That's the part everyone always forgets about. The months after a move, when you're forced to live amongst towers of cardboard boxes, all your worldly possessions buried deep within them, and you can never remember which crate anything is in when you urgently need it. So realizing it would take him much longer to unpack all of his things, Milo set about making sure he had everything that Donut and Pixel would need already to hand. The latter of his two pets, the bearded dragon, usually spent most of his days in a spacious glass tank. Milo didn't love the idea of keeping either of his two best buds so confined, but Pixel never went very far anyway, content to lay under a heat lamp almost perfectly still for most of the day. Donut, on the other hand, was much more of a free spirit. The tiny brown hamster physically could not stay still. and most days seemed to be filled with more energy than Milo was. As a result, he let the little guy roll about inside a little plastic ball all day long until his little hamster feet gave out. And now Donut had much more space to zip around inside his ball, so while he entertained himself, Milo could focus on what needed fixing, cleaning, and generally improving around the house. It didn't take him long to realize, however, that the realtors had pulled a bit of a fast one on him. Despite the absolute steal of a price that Milo had been offered, it quickly became clear that the unknown fate of the previous residents wasn't the only detail about the house that had been conveniently kept hidden. The place was in dire need of repair, with a lot of the old woodwork rapidly rotting away. If left unchecked, parts of the house could collapse and come apart at the seams. To make matters worse, the boiler was an ancient iron monstrosity that was barely able to produce warm water, which would quickly become an even bigger problem when the weather started to get colder. Then, to top off the trifecta of unforeseen issues and teething problems with his new place, Milo couldn't sleep. It was to be expected. After all, the house was old, worn out, and had definitely seen better days. There were bound to be a few noises, the odd creak coming from upstairs when Milo and his two pets were all downstairs, the tapping of branches against windows blowing in the wind outside. But for some reason, every audible disturbance that emanated from some hidden corner of the building only seemed to get 1,000 times louder when the sun went down. At nighttime, every squeaky floorboard or random noise of the house settling was nearly deafening, enough to pull Milo right out of what little restless sleep he was getting. The worst part about it was, though he couldn't help it, it made him feel unwelcome, as if Mr. and Mrs. Shaw were angered that he had moved in. In the dark, it was hard not to picture every sound as one or both of the old couple creeping through the corridors, coming to reclaim their home and remove Milo from the premises. One night, the noises started invading what little sleep Milo did manage to get, spilling into his dream and causing them to devolve into unsettling nightmares. There was an old photograph in a frame that he had come across in the personal effects left behind by the Shaws, showing the pair of them staring disapprovingly out of the image at him. Now, thanks to the creaking wooden structure of the house and the sounds it made at night, Milo was seeing the old couple in every bad dream he had. Both their faces were locked in those same still, frozen expressions of contempt as they tried to exorcise him like an interloper on their property. That was the final nail in the coffin that made Milo realize he needed to look at other options. Surely there had to be some way to induce a deep enough sleep so that the sounds the house was making weren't keeping him up or incepting nightmares anymore. He called the local doctor, arranging a consultation for later that day. As he hung up the phone, something nudged against his foot. It was Donut, having rolled through the maze of cardboard boxes still filling the house. Milo took one look at the little brown furred hamster, then the crates that still littered the place. Grabbing the leftover items that the Shaws had forgotten to take with them before they vanished, Milo moved those boxes out into the shed. He knew he was probably reaching, that it was hardly likely to make even the slightest difference to his sleeping, but maybe keeping their stuff away from him would keep the old couple out of his head. The only thing he kept in the house was the blanket. There was no use letting it go to waste, especially knowing that the boiler was on the blink and it would be cold soon. He rolled it up and left it on his bed, leaving his more mobile pet in the same room before heading out to see the doctor. When Milo got back, a bottle of prescription sleeping pills in his pocket, he couldn't help but notice his room seemed different. The blanket looked like it had fallen off the bed and onto the floor for one. But more worryingly, Donut's plastic travel ball had been split open, laying in pieces on the ground, with its furry little occupant nowhere to be seen. Over the next few hours, Milo searched every corner of the house, calling out to his hamster, trying to lure it back with more morsels of food. But Donut didn't seem to be anywhere. He wasn't even underneath the knitted blanket. Still, there was no sign. As worry set in, Milo hurriedly checked Pixel's cage to see if he was gone too, but the lizard was relaxing, as lethargic as ever, completely unfazed by what was going on. It certainly seemed that when it rained, it really poured in this new house. Just as he was searching for his missing hamster, Milo heard a new, horrible sound echo through the corridors. This one wasn't so much a scary noise, even if it did make him jump, but it was more the inconvenience that came with it. Finally, giving out after God knows how many years it had been installed for, the house's boiler burst. Spending the afternoon into the evening failing to track down one of his missing pets and stopping the huge iron cast boiler from flooding the basement wasn't exactly what Milo had in mind for fun activities to do when he got home. Going to bed frustrated made it as hard to sleep as all the nightly cacophony of creaking floorboards and branches raking against the windows. He tapped out 2 of the pills the doctor had prescribed him, knocking them back with a sharp motion of his head and a swig of cold water before laying back in bed. As night had fallen, the temperature also had plummeted too, and not having a boiler to heat his room meant that Milo couldn't stop himself from shivering in the cold, his breath forming clouds in front of his face. He reached for the knitted blanket and threw it over himself, curling up underneath it to try and provide an extra layer of warmth to protect himself from the gnawing cold. The pills did as they were meant to, helping Milo to quickly sleep into a much deeper sleep than he had experienced in a while. Although it didn't seem to help the nightmares, Mr. and Mrs. Shaw came back again. This time they had Milo's arms and legs tied up. With their matching disapproving faces, the elderly couple threw something over their helpless victim and tried to smother him to death. For a dream, it felt so intense, so real. Milo could feel a heavy weight on top of his body as he slept. In fact, it felt like it was all around him, engulfing and crushing the life out of him from all sides. But it was the feeling of something wet against his arm, the sensation of liquid against his skin, and the numbness where his hand should be were what finally pulled him out of the dream and into the nightmare. Through the dark and his cloudy vision, Milo could see a wide, gaping maw filled with teeth. The feeling of being crushed was still surrounding him, and despite kicking his legs and trying to free himself from confinement, it didn't stop squeezing him tighter. His panic was already making it harder to catch his breath, but now he could barely fill his lungs enough to scream for help. Not that anyone was around to hear him, but it was the side of his arm that chilled Milo's blood. It wasn't there anymore. Part of it, just above the elbow, was just gone. His hand, fingers, every internal bone and muscle had been reduced to a bloody mess, a slurry of red melting and coming apart. It was runny, little more than a liquid resembling the consistency of sand when it's underwater and becomes sludge. Most of his flesh was liquefied, going further up his arm, and as the blanket pulled its prey into its mouth, until Milo was no more, not a trace of him left, just like the previous owners. Little did Milo, or the Shaws and Donut before him, know, but he'd been the victim of a creature that was part of a rather unique species. While they will often vary in size, shape, pattern, and other aspects of their appearance, SCP-799 always seemed to be ordinary items of knitted bedwear, at least at first. They retain heat like a normal blanket would, and are soft to the touch, and for the most part, don't seem directly harmful. And usually, they aren't. SCP-799s are incapable of much movement, instead laying still a lot of time, not unlike a certain bearded dragon that just lost its owner. They also don't seem to require much in the way of food, extracting what little nutrition they do need by drawing in household dust. A lot of the organic matter in dust is comprised of dead and discarded human hair and skin cells, so this makes sense. This feeding is all done through filtered mouths in the fibers. However, this changes if an SCP-799 blanket is forced to go on a long time without food. While they possess this biological trait themselves, SCP-799 don't seem to regard cold-blooded animals to be the source of food. In fact, they don't even seem to be able to detect other creatures with cold blood, such as reptiles. Instead, SCP-799 will metamorphose into a more predatory form in order to consume any warm-blooded mammal or human being it encounters, transforming its feeding orifices and digestive tract into a singular mouth lined with several rows of sharp, pointed teeth. From there, it will wrap up the largest warm-blooded animal it can find, whether that be a hamster or a grown man, and will tear off parts of its prey, reducing them to little more than a thin slurry as it digests their body mass to feed itself. So if you move into a new house and come across an old knitted blanket, maybe consider throwing it out, if you want to live.
Everybody remembered where they were, what they had been doing, when the SCP Foundation revealed themselves to the world. It was an event that had so fundamentally changed the lives of every person on Earth that it became pretty hard to forget that momentous, horrible day. Even though, for most people, It had begun as a day like most others. Dane Moss had been at home when it started. His roommates were talking about buying an air hockey table for their place, something to liven up their Saturday nights. Even as he half listened to them discussing it, Dane figured it would never happen. He was right, of course, but he never could have anticipated the thing that stopped it. All of them had stopped and fallen silent as the news report came through. A group calling themselves the SCP Foundation, previously responsible for the containment of anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena, had declared its new intention to exterminate the entire human race. Dane's split-second belief that the broadcast was a Cloverfield-style viral marketing stunt for a new movie was quickly disproved when the ground started to shake. Unbeknownst to him, the Foundation was not only real, but had detonated nuclear charges along the back of SCP-169, an enormous ancient arthropod that's body had made up an archipelago adrift in the ocean. The detonation caused the Leviathan to stir, resulting in massive earthquakes and tsunamis. Dane was the only one to make it out of the apartment alive. Elsewhere, Joe Reese had been grabbing a coffee on his way home from work. He briefly overheard the news report, but barely paid it any mind. Then, waiting for his flat white, wondering what the holdup was, he caught a part of a conversation between two people behind him.
What is that thing?
One asked.
I don't know, but its face is pure nightmare fuel,
The other replied.
A bunch of pictures of it just appeared on everyone's socials. It's really freaky stuff.
A sudden shriek went out from a number of the coffee shop patrons. Joe noticed a towering humanoid shadow being cast by something behind him. Its arms were stretched out disproportionately long, and it was attacking the two people behind him. Acting on an instantaneous fight-or-flight response, Joe ran, without looking back to see SCP-096 slaughtering everyone that had seen its face. Around the same time as the Foundation's ominous announcement was played over every news channel on the planet, Renee Hudson and Sky Soto had been on a date. The pair of them had been enjoying hanging out, playing a few mildly competitive games at the bowling alley, but there was still something unspoken lingering in the air. Neither Sky nor Renee really felt any connection. They liked each other's company, but that was as far as it went. Although neither one of them knew how to broach the subject for fear of hurting the other's feelings, and in the same vein, neither of them could have predicted the commotion that would happen next. The noise came from outside, the deafening screams followed by a flood of people running for their lives. Hundreds, if not thousands, were fleeing, any that fell over in the street being trampled underfoot by everyone behind them. Human beings moved like a mass of ants clambering over each other to get away from a gigantic, ferocious lizard. Despite the news broadcast declaring themselves and their intentions to wipe out all of humanity, nobody on the ground would ever be able to comprehend just why the Foundation unleashed SCP-682 and allowed the hard-to-destroy reptile to slaughter innocent civilians in droves. While they didn't know it, or may not have agreed, Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe were all lucky to have survived the initial anomalous onslaught unleashed by a rogue SCP Foundation. It did little to ease the pain of being displaced from their homes, forced to migrate across the country to join camps of other survivors, made refugees by anomaly attacks, and the efforts of apathetic agents of the Foundation. And of the four of them, not one could have predicted the shared fate that awaited them. During the months in the wake of the Foundation's opening assault on mankind, Renee and Sky had mostly stuck together. They had moved further and further south, managing to stay safe. Neither one had thought about their awkward date in months. They were just grateful to have someone they knew to stick together with. Meanwhile, Joe and Dane were hopping from one refugee camp to the next much in the same way, moving north and eastward, respectively. After deploying their first wave of anomalies, the SCP Foundation's efforts had shifted to primarily focusing on groups of interest that could pose a threat to their plans. While organizations with knowledge of the anomalous, like the Global Occult Coalition, were among the first in their crosshairs, the civilian population was left living in fear, but unscathed. That is, until the Foundation began targeting the refugee camps. One of their tactics was to unleash SCP-2241, a 7-year-old boy with reality-warping powers, into survivor communities to act as a living weapon, destroying the larger refugee camps. It was the increased frequency and ruthlessness of the Foundation's attacks on human survivors that forced Sky, Renee, Dane, and Joe to unknowingly converge on each other. Camps for survivors started getting smaller, consisting of only a handful of people, in the hopes that this would make it easier for them to avoid detection by the Foundation. Arriving and hopping off the back of a jeep with only the clothes on their backs, the 4 strangers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been brought to an abandoned dock, the wreckage of an overturned cargo ship laying on its side in the harbor. Shipping containers were scattered all around, looking as if they had spilled out of the boat and onto the dock. The driver of the jeep hadn't told them where to go from there. Instead, he had just driven off without so much as a word. The 4 of them looked around. Dane seemed particularly unnerved at being so close to the water, despite it having been months since the Leviathan settled back to sleep. Suddenly, one of the shipping containers burst open, and a broad flannel shirt-wearing man stepped out. His face was buried beneath a thick beard, a shotgun resting against his shoulder as he approached the group. The man's stern, stony expression quickly changed into a wide grin as he jovially and unexpectedly pulled Dane into a hug.
"Welcome, my friends!"
The man roared with laughter.
"Oh, welcome!"
Who are you?" Sky asked.
Of course, allow me to introduce myself,"
he responded, letting go of Dane, who needed to catch his breath after being squeezed so much.
"My name is Jovianus. For safety, I watch over this camp,"
the man announced. Camp? Joe asked, looking at the wreckage.
"The Foundation has been getting more zealous with targeting those of us that are left,"
Jovianus explained, gesturing for the 4 to follow him as he walked back towards the container.
"So we had to take a less conspicuous approach to surviving, splitting the camps up into fewer people, dispersing everyone around a bit more, and of course,"
he swung open the door to the metal container. Inside the cramped space, there were 2 bunks either side, one above the other, making 4 in total, along with a sleeping bag on the floor.
"Staying in place is the Foundation one thing to look," Jovianus continued.
"We have to sleep in here?" Renee asked in disbelief.
"Better for avoiding detection,"
the camp's protector replied.
"Otherwise, the next camp along is only 20 minutes away on foot, over in a warehouse, if you'd rather go there, but be warned, they have rats."
Although it came with a brief adjustment period, the group quickly acclimatized to living in the abandoned dock. Each of them came to appreciate Jovianus's efforts to keep them all fed with what few rations they had. The 4 of them started calling him Big Joe, referring to Joe as Lil Joe to avoid confusion. Of the group, Dane seemed to have the hardest time adapting. He was something of a conspiracy theorist, anxiously talking about the other great disasters throughout human history and wondering if the Foundation had been responsible for them all. Sky felt a little sorry for him, so they decided to humor his theory that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii was also the SCP Foundation's doing, despite occurring all the way back in 79 AD. Through all their various concerns about surviving in this anomalous apocalyptic world, Big Joe seemed to have a talent for keeping the group's spirits up. Whether it was by recounting them all with folk stories or turning bland food rations into more flavorful meals, he made the 4 of them feel safe, especially with his weapon never far away. That is, until one evening. A glowing red streak shot through the air not far from camp, catching Jovianus's immediate attention. It was an emergency flare, set up by the neighboring camp at the warehouse. Something was wrong. Grabbing his shotgun and urging Sky, Dane, Renee, and Lil Joe to stay put, Big Joe left, running off into the growing dark of the night to try to help. The whole group stayed awake, waiting for their protector to return, the next hour feeling like an eternity. By the time he returned, the sun had fully set outside. Even by the low light of their lamps inside the container, it was clear by his face that any and all optimism had drained out of Jovianus.
"There was nothing left of all. There was nothing left. All of them were gone,"
he explained, unable to believe what he had seen.
"There was this oil everywhere, corrosive like an acid, just burning through what was left of them."
Trying to regain some semblance of composure, he urged the group to get some sleep, reassuring them that they would be safe for the rest of the night. Not one of them realized just how wrong they were, or that they'd never seen Jovianus again after they fell asleep. Renee was the first to discover he had gone missing, screaming with panic, waking up Sky and the 2 boys. After they had calmed down, Sky tried to rationalize what was going on. They were worried about Big Joe and the others, but he couldn't afford to lose their nerve and potentially attract the attention of a Foundation kill squad.
"It's the Foundation,"
Dane babbled, terrified.
"They found us.
They're closing in. Oh, man.
Relax, Sky replied. All of you chill. There are other camps nearby. Maybe Big Joe went to check on them too. See if what had happened to the warehouse group happened anywhere else. You don't think he would have told us? Lil Joe retorted, seeming to be the least concerned about Jovianus' whereabouts. We were asleep. It's not like him to wake us up. He knows we'd worry. Sky answered. Well, what if he's dead? Renee sobbed. Don't say that, they replied. She's right, though. He left his shotgun right here. Joe interjected again. Whatever got the warehouse group killed him. It's obvious. At least I don't have to go by that stupid nickname anymore. What the hell, man? Dane yelled. You're joking at a time like this? What's wrong with you? There was an uncomfortably long pause. Everyone in the container turned to look at Joe, leaning against one of the metal walls with his arms folded. The other three were all thinking the same thing, although Dane was the first to say it aloud. You killed him, didn't you? Don't be ridiculous! Joe chastised him, backing away slightly, betraying his own little hint of fear. You and Renee are hysterical. You both need to calm down. Before Joe could finish his sentence, a withered arm reached out of the wall and grabbed his throat. It looked like the rotting, decaying arm of a corpse, protruding out of a puddle of black mucus that now seemed to be spreading across the inner wall of the container. Renee screamed in horror as more of the black substance oozed from the arm, melting away Joe as it held him helplessly in its grip. It was then that a face peered through the oily patch smeared on the wall, the nightmarish visage of SCP-106, the old man. For a second, Sky thought about trying to help Joe. They could have pulled him free, but it was already too late. The corrosion was spreading. It looked like it would melt them too if they so much as touched it. Joe was gone. The remaining three of them burst out of the shipping container they had called home, afraid for their lives. What the hell was that? Dane screamed. Oh man, I knew it. They've sent a monster after us. Sky barely paid him any mind, their attention grabbed by movement nearby. Someone had started running the second they had exited the shipping crate. They had been watching from a distance. Hey, stop! Sky yelled, about to run after them. Sky? Renee's voice was cracking under the weight of her terror. Turning around, they saw it. The old man stood behind Renee. It looked even more grotesque under the low light provided by several distant fires in the ruins of cities the Foundation had destroyed, giving the horizon a hellish glow. SCP-106's withered, lipless face bore his rotting teeth, locked in a skull-like grin. It gave a sense he was gaining some twisted enjoyment out of what he did next. Renee had been frozen to the spot, sniffling in fear, her legs rigid and locked in place, until the old man clamped a hand over her shoulder. Then she cried out in a blood-curdling shriek of agony. More of the black ooze spilled from his emaciated fingers, dripping down her front while Sky looked on in terror. Renee had been the one person who had been with them the entire time, from the moment the Foundation unleashed hell. Every camp they moved to, Renee was in the same one with them. The pair of them may have not been a couple, but she had been the only constant in this anomalous apocalypse. And now, this sinister SCP was killing her. Fighting every urge to grab Renee and pull her free, Sky instead let themselves be led away by Dane. Choking back tears, they ran alongside him in the direction of whoever had been watching them. The shadowy figure was just about visible, although definitely still close enough to be heard. In the dark, there was the sound of a fall, accompanied by a pained grunt, indicating that whoever had been watching the container had tripped. Both Dane and Sky knew that this was their chance. Together they lunged at the figure before he had a chance to scramble back to his feet, with Dane pinning the observer down by his wrists. That was when the light of the burning city on the horizon illuminated his face. He was the jeep driver, the one who had dropped them at Jovianus' camp to begin with, the only other person, apart from Big Joe, who knew where their camp was. You! Sky declared. What were you doing spying on us? I have nothing to say to you, the man spat. Answer their question, Dane yelled, slapping the man in the face, although he didn't seem to react. What is this thing chasing us? Why did it kill our friends? You might as well tell us, Sky told him calmly. After all, once that monster catches up, we'll all be dead. You were watching, expecting a result, right? Had to make sure none of us made it. Not that there's anyone left for us to tell if we did survive. He's with the Foundation, Dane gasped, catching on quickly. You had them send that corpse thing to kill us, man! SCP-106, the undercover MTF agent corrected. And yeah, it's here because we sent it. You all went underground hiding in your little camps.
We had to look even closer to find you all. Ungrateful, all of you.
Ungrateful!
Sky exploded, enraged and offended at the idea anyone could justify all the death the Foundation had unleashed on the world.
What, you expect us to thank you for hunting your fellow human beings to extinction? Dropping nightmare after nightmare on us, and we're meant to be grateful for that?
None of you understand what we're trying to do, the Foundation agent replied without a hint of remorse. What we're trying to do is bigger, more important than your mundane little lives. The only way we can save humanity from it is by wiping you out. Before either Sky or Dane could ask what it was, a gloopy, oily smear appeared on the ground. Clawing his way out of it, the old man reached for the MTF operative, disintegrating him like he had done before. But the agent barely reacted, didn't cry out like Renee or Joe had. He was still, even as he was being melted by the slimy black secretion of SCP-106. It was as if the man couldn't feel the pain of what was happening to him as he died. A splatter of the same corrosive mucus spread onto Dane's sleeve. Freaking out as it began burning through his jacket, he desperately tried to wipe it off, only to smear it, spreading the dissolving substance further and crying out as he felt it eating into the palms of his hands. SCP-106 climbed out of its oily puddle, dropping the disintegrating MTF agent. He disappeared into the corrosive pool, vanishing from sight like he'd fallen into a ditch. Sky backed away, their eyes locked with the sunken stare of the old man, feeling their legs begin to freeze in fear just like Renee's. Gun! Dane rasped, laying at SCP-106's feet, slowly succumbing to the same fate that had befallen the others. Big Joe's gun! He rasped again. With the last of his strength, he used his arm to grab the old man's ankle, howling in pain as more of the black substance oozed from the monster's wrinkled flesh. Sky turned and raced back towards the shipping container, hardly daring to look over their shoulder. Every movement, every tiny shift of shadow they detected in the corner of their eye filled their mind with the images of the old man bearing down on them, wearing that sadistic, skeletal grin. Sky pulled the heavy metal door open, using all their strength to get back inside. Their arms were numbed, trembling so much with terror that it was like they weren't attached properly. They fumbled about in the dark, their fingers brushing up against the weapon, resting in the corner where Jovianus had left it. Pulling on the pump, Sky turned, the gun raised, knowing that the old man was right behind them, and pulled the trigger. It gave a redundant click. It was empty, no ammunition. The gun had been just for show. SCP-106 reached for the weapon and pulled it from Sky's hands, the metal of it slowly melting as it was coated in the tar-like corrosive substance. Recoiling their hands from it, Sky went to dash for the door, only to feel the old man's bony, burning fingers hook into their back and drag them towards the greasy black stain he was leaning out of, pulling them into his domain. This world had been a living nightmare since the Foundation had revealed itself and unleashed an anomalous apocalypse upon humanity. But SCP-106's pocket dimension might just have been worse.
Throwing indestructible lizards into vats of acid, hunting strange chicken men through forests in Ireland, arguing in Latin with a man wearing a haunted Roman centurion's helmet. When you join the SCP Foundation, you might be expecting high-octane drama all the time. Especially with the name Street Sweepers, you'd expect this mobile task force to be neck-deep in some real action-packed street racing. Maybe you wouldn't think that they'd be tasked with driving all day, every day, in 4-hour shifts, tailing a semi-truck all over Birmingham, Alabama. But as Agent Moore and his colleague pulled into the lay-by behind the truck, neither of them were ready for what they were about to witness. SCP-2590 was first discovered by the Foundation at a routine traffic stop. Investigating a totally different anomaly in the Birmingham area, Agents Peters and Smith had been posing as local police officers. The Foundation had been trying to track down an artifact that was supposedly being smuggled across the US in the back of a nondescript station wagon. Peters and Smith had been allocated a pair of beat-up old police cruisers, which they'd parked across the dirt road, fully blocking any traffic from coming through. It was several hours into their shift when the incident occurred, just at the point they were starting to lose focus. Taking a look through the suitcases and memorabilia from a family's trip to Disney World, Peters had taken way too long to hear the noise of the engine swelling behind him. He spun around to see the hulking shape of the semi-truck barreling straight towards him, Agent Smith, and a family of 5. With only 2 seconds to react, he yelled out at the top of his lungs and dived out of the way, leaving the trunk of the car wide open with 5 screams emerging from inside. Smith, who had been sitting in one of the cruisers, only just managed to get out before the semi made contact. Eyes closed, Agent Peters waited for the inevitable sound of screaming rubber, the bang of metal on metal, and the shower of glass on asphalt, but it never came. When he opened his eyes, the station wagon was still parked up in front of them, the 2 police cruisers still blocking the road, and all of the Disney merch still piled high in the trunk. The semi was driving off along the road on the other side of their blockade with not a scratch on it. Without a moment's hesitation, Agent Smith, who had kept his eyes open and witnessed the whole thing, leapt into action. He ordered his partner, still lying confused in the dirt, to administer Class A amnestics to the family and call in for backup. Agent Smith himself jammed his keys into the ignition, twisting them so hard he almost bent the metal, and took off after the vehicle. What Agent Smith and Peters had just witnessed was the very first Foundation exposure to SCP-2590, fondly nicknamed Trailer Trash. As Smith pulled up alongside the vehicle and studied it for the first time, he made a note of its initial appearance over the radio, an appearance which remains unchanged years later. The badges on the vehicle claim that it is an International ProStar day cab semi-trailer truck, complete with an unmarked trailer. As the agent flicked on his lights and indicated that the vehicle should pull over, he noted that it didn't have any license plates on it, either front or rear. He leaned forward in his seat, trying to peer into the cab to make out the driver, but in the Alabama sun, the man just looked like a shadowy figure. They drove side by side along the road for almost a mile. The truck made no signs of pulling over despite Agent Smith's continued insistence and repeated flashes of the cop lights, but it also didn't attempt to pull away either. It just continued to drive a few miles per hour below the speed limit. The driver didn't seem to look across at him once. Having discussed it with Foundation staff, they decided it was best not to draw attention to the situation. They had no idea whether this SCP was hostile or posed any threat to civilian life, but having blue and red lights flashing at it appeared to be doing little to change the situation. Instead, he switched off the sirens and pulled in behind the truck, tailing it around Birmingham as the Foundation readied further agents to respond to the situation. For almost an hour, nothing of note happened. Agent Smith drove behind the trailer, watching it like a hawk. He observed that it obeyed every traffic law to a T. It never broke the speed limit, never cut anyone off, and left room for other vehicles to merge. If it hadn't seen it drive straight through a roadblock as if it wasn't there, he would have never suspected a thing. But then the truck turned its turn signal on. They had just come off the highway and merged onto a quiet side street, just as the sun was starting to hang low in the sky. The truck crept across the side of the road, squeezing its brakes gently, and stopped. Agent Smith matched the action the whole way, pulling up about 20 feet behind the trailer. In constant radio communication, he kicked open his door and stepped out into the evening air. Foundation personnel advised that he keep his hand on his gun at all times and approach with caution. He didn't really need them to tell him that. Smith called for the driver to step out of the cab. No response. The truck just sat there with its hazards on, engine off. After a moment, there was a clunk, and the trailer door started to slowly open, all by itself. Agent Smith called in backup, but they were still several minutes out. Instead, he ran back to the car, gun raised, and waited to see what was inside as the door slowly opened to reveal nothing. No, not quite nothing. There was something small on the floor of the trailer, right in the center, as if it hadn't been moved around at all by the vehicle's motion. It was red, a kind of elongated cuboid. He reported it all to the Foundation over his radio, then paused when he recognized what it was. A Kit Kat candy bar, or to be more specific, a Kit Kat Chunky. What happened after this point was hazy. Agent Smith was found on the roadside just 20 minutes later, confused about what had happened. The truck was nowhere in sight. However, a security camera from a convenience store just up the street happened to capture the interaction. In the footage, you see Agent Smith approaching the trailer with his gun raised, looking at the Kit Kat. He tries to enter the trailer, but is unable to, so he approaches the driver's side door. While talking to the shadowy figure in the cab, he drops his gun and stands motionless. a confused and sleepy expression on his face until the trailer door closes and the SCP drives away. Contact was reestablished with SCP-2590 soon after and has been maintained almost uninterrupted ever since. The findings made on that initial encounter seem to hold true across further examination. Personnel have reached out to Navistar International, the company that supposedly manufactures this model of semi-truck, but there appears to be no records of its creation or shipment to the US. In fact, no documentation at all can be attributed to the truck or any components on it. The driver in the front cab is a humanoid figure who is perpetually shrouded in shadow, designated SCP-2590-1. Attempts to reveal the driver's figures have proved ineffective, as even powerful spotlights do not shed enough light into the cab to render the driver visible. Quite what this driver's role is in the operation of SCP-2590 is unknown. SCP-2590-1 appears to have some proximity-based amnestic qualities, as anyone approaching it on foot has reported memory loss and confusion soon after, just like Agent Smith. As also discovered by the two agents and their roadblock, containment of this SCP is simply not possible. While the majority of the time the SCP is corporeal, it possesses the ability to pass through solid objects at will. All attempted roadblocks have resulted in the same thing happening. The SCP will just phase right through on them as if nothing was there. Since it cannot be contained in the usual way, a different operation has been set up to monitor the truck's activities, which so far have proven to be apparently harmless to the civilian population. Mobile Task Force Gamma-133, also known as the Street Sweepers, has been established to follow this SCP around Birmingham at all times. They operate in 4-hour shifts, with 2 agents in unmarked vehicles sticking close behind the trailer at all times. The Foundation was able to fit a tracking device onto it as well, providing researchers with continuous location data for where they can find the vehicle. At seemingly random times, supposedly determined by the SCP itself, it pulls over somewhere quiet and opens the door to its trailer. The door will remain open for 60 seconds and then close again. Any attempts to enter the trailer have been blocked by some kind of invisible barrier, seemingly impenetrable to most approaches. More violent and destructive methods of entry cannot be authorized for testing, due to the heavy civilian population in the surrounding area. Every time the doors open, there is something different in the trailer. Researchers are trying to ascertain some kind of pattern or messaging behind most of the objects, but many seem to be random. The current list of things that have appeared in the back of SCP-2590 include an iPhone 3G, a red apple, and a lit light bulb without any visible form of power supply. Most notable about the objects in the trailer is that often they appear to be human beings, as happened on the night that Agent Moore was on duty in the Street Sweepers. The agents pulled in behind the truck as per usual when it slowed to a stop beside the highway. Agent Moore got out of the vehicle second, unenthused about the monotony of the task he had been assigned. Expecting to see a cardboard box or a chapstick when the trailer door opened, he was left shocked when he came face to face with himself. Few people can say they have seen themselves in real life. Most of them have been administered with various amnestics to make them forget, but Agent Moore went on to report how bizarre of an experience it was. He claimed that it was utterly unlike looking in a mirror where your reflection is flipped and follows your every move. Seeing yourself standing in 3 dimensions, moving independently and evidently in a great deal of distress, is an experience that few would envy. Anytime a human being materializes in the trailer, they appear to be in a great deal of distress as they attempt to escape through the invisible barrier. Agent Moore and his partner Agent Hall could do nothing but stand and watch in confusion as the copy of him attempted to free himself before. After the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed and the vehicle pulled away again. Several instances have occurred of duplicate humans appearing in the trailer, but each time the original person seems to have had no knowledge of this taking place, and nothing out of the ordinary happens to them. However, there appears to be some small pattern demonstrating the SCP as an awareness of the Foundation, as it has also duplicated Agent Inglis's sister, who has no connection to this SCP at all. Incident 16 was the most distressing of all, as a large slab of metal appeared in the back of the trailer, with the SCP Foundation logo painted across it. Agent Inglis and Schultz were on duty at this time, and observed copious amounts of blood flowing out of the metal slab. Before long, the blood filled the back of the trailer, pushing up against the invisible barrier. All of a sudden, 52 seconds into the encounter, the barrier vanished, and a cascade of blood with the slab inside were launched out at the two agents at a speed of over 190 kilometers an hour, killing them both instantly. Since this incident, SCP-2590 has been treated with greater caution. The most mysterious thing to have come from researching this truck came on December 4th, 2011, when, for the first time, the truck's tracking beacon stopped working. It had been seen pulling into an abandoned warehouse, and so a team of street sweepers was immediately dispatched to investigate. When they arrived, they found the vehicle moving through the warehouse at a slow crawl. Choosing to pursue on foot and leave a pair of agents at the entrance, they followed the SCP through the facility until it came to what agents described as a service tunnel or sewer of some sort. Putting headlamps on, they followed the truck down into the tunnel, maintaining radio contact throughout. As they reported the direction they were traveling and the distance, it quickly became apparent to Foundation personnel that this was no ordinary tunnel. The warehouse was positioned overlooking a cliff, and so the geography was not physically possible. As the street sweepers descended further into the tunnel, they noted there was increased levels of carbon monoxide. Radio contact started to dip in and out, losing signal as they went further downhill. Just at the edge of their signal with the Foundation, the truck stopped and opened its trailer door. Inside was just a single piece of parchment with the words, "I'm just delivering a message," written on it. After the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed, and the truck continued. After they had passed the kilometer mark, the radio signal worsened quickly, and after a couple of scrambled messages, the team down there were not heard from again. The channel stayed open for another 6 hours before the Foundation made the decision to announce the agents missing in action. In March 2015, over 3 years later, a radio signal came into contact with the Foundation again from Birmingham, Alabama. It was from the headset of the squad leader who had gone into the tunnel. Initially confused as to who had gained access to the comms channel, the Foundation demanded that the agent state his full name and rank. The agent, himself confused, obliged, questioning why they were so suspicious. He and his team claimed to have only lost contact for about 15 minutes. They had followed the SCP a little further until carbon monoxide levels had risen too high to continue, at which point they had watched the truck disappearing into the distance as they walked back to the surface. All agents have undergone extensive psychological rehabilitation to settle them back into society, as well as classes to fill them in on things like the London Olympics, the Ice Bucket Challenge, and Gangnam Style. As for SCP-2590, it is back out on the roads, roaming around Birmingham, Alabama continuously, never stopping for fuel, always obeying the rules of the road, occasionally opening its trailer doors to reveal new and bizarre findings. Now check out Living Ice Cream Van, SCP-1386, and SCP-342 A Ticket to Ride for more.